Hey there, story lovers. This is Supreme Harry, and we're bringing you an epic adventure. What if Fawkes burned away 38 blocks on Harry's magical core at sorting and exposed Dumbledore's 60-year master plan live? Hit like, subscribe, and let's begin this journey. Chapter 1, Phoenix Fire. The candles in the Great Hall had been burning for 3 hours before anyone thought to check whether they were real. That was the thing about Hogwarts, it made you stop questioning. The ceiling showed a clear September sky, deep indigo bleeding toward black, and the candles floated in their hundreds like a private constellation, and after a while you just accepted it. You accepted the moving staircases and the portraits that whispered and the ghosts that drifted through your soup, and you stopped asking how because the how was less interesting than the what, and the what was always extraordinary enough. The first years filed in wearing their damp robes and their wide eyes, and the older students watched them with the particular nostalgia of people who'd only been 11 themselves 2 or 3 years ago but already felt ancient by comparison. The Weasley twins, Fred and George, 5th year, identical in every way that mattered and entirely different in every way that didn't, sat at the Gryffindor table with matching expressions of theatrical boredom that fooled absolutely no one. 42 first years, Fred said, tilting his head to count. Down from last year. War hangover, George said. People stopped having babies during you-know-who's run. Basic biology. Charming. Accurate. At the staff table, Albus Dumbledore sat in his high-backed chair with his fingers laced and his half-moon spectacles perched at the precise angle that made him look simultaneously like your favorite grandfather and the most dangerous man in the room. He watched the first year's file in the way a chess player watches the board being set up, with patience, with anticipation, and with the quiet confidence of someone who already knew how the game would end. He did not look at the doors. He should have looked at the doors. The first years came to a shuffling, uncertain stop in front of the staff table, and Professor McGonagall set the ancient three-legged stool in the center of the floor with the ceremony of someone who'd done this 4 decades running and still took it seriously. The sorting hat sat on top of it looking like something rescued from a scarecrow, and the Great Hall quieted in that particular Hogwarts way, not because anyone told it to, but because something old and true was about to happen, and even 11-year-olds with no magical education understood that much. The hat opened its brim and sang. Harry Potter stood near the back of the first-year line, 3 inches shorter than he should have been for his age and wearing robes that fit him properly for the first time in his life. He'd bought them himself in Diagon Alley with money from a vault he hadn't known existed until 3 weeks ago, and every time the fabric settled against his shoulders instead of drowning him in someone else's cast-offs, he felt a small, complicated thing he didn't have a word for yet. He was watching the ceiling. Not the hat, not the teachers, not the older students sizing them up from the long house tables, the ceiling. The spelled sky. He'd read about it in Hogwarts, a history on the train, sitting wedged into a compartment with a girl named Hermione Granger who'd recited the relevant passage from memory before he'd gotten 2 sentences in, and he'd thought, fine, I'll just see it myself and that'll be that. But looking at it now, with the candlelight warm against the stone and the stars beginning to show in the charmed dark overhead, he felt something shift in his chest. Something that had been very tightly coiled for as long as he could remember. He pressed a hand briefly against his sternum. The feeling didn't go away. It got stronger. McGonagall unrolled her scroll and began to read names. Abbott, Hannah, the little girl at the front of the line ran to the stool and jammed the hat on her head. 20 seconds of silence. Then, Hufflepuff, and the Hufflepuff table erupted and Hannah Abbott ran to join them with her cheeks blazing pink. Harry watched and tried to ignore the pressure in his chest, which had gone from a tightening to something that felt disturbingly like a hand pushing outward from inside his ribcage. Bones, Susan, Hufflepuff. Boot, Terry, Ravenclaw. The names kept coming. He kept watching the ceiling. The pressure kept building, and now there was heat in it, not painful, not quite, but the kind of heat that reminded you it could become painful if it wanted to. He'd felt something like this once before, the summer before his Hogwarts letter arrived, when Dudley had cornered him against the school fence and he'd been so frightened and so furious at the same time that the fence had simply bent outward. Away from him. As if the metal itself had decided to take his side. Aunt Petunia had locked him in his cupboard for 4 days after that. Finch Fletchley, Justin, he pressed his hand harder against his sternum and breathed carefully through his nose and told himself to stop it, whatever it was, because the last thing he needed on his first night at wizarding school was to accidentally bend something. And then the doors of the great hall opened. Not the main doors, the high arched entrance through which the first years had filed. These were smaller doors, set into the wall behind the staff table, the ones that led to the private corridors where teachers went when they needed to be elsewhere without being observed. They opened without anyone touching them. They swung wide and slow on silent hinges, and the candles nearest to them flickered with something that was not wind, and Dumbledore looked up for the first time all evening with an expression that cracked, just fractionally, through his grandfatherly composure. The phoenix came in like a sunrise. Not metaphorically. Fawkes, for it was unmistakably Fawkes, the headmaster's own familiar, the crimson and gold bird that had sat on its perch in the headmaster's office for decades, arrived trailing actual light. Not the reflected light of feathers, not the pleasant warm glow of a magical creature's proximity, but light. His own. Coming off his wings in waves that rolled across the stone floor like heat shimmer and made the shadows pull back and the candle flames stand perfectly still, as if holding their breath. He was not flying the way birds fly. He was moving the way fire moves, not concerned with direction or destination, only with arriving. Every head in the great hall turned. McGonagall stopped mid-name with her scroll half unrolled. Dumbledore stood up. Slowly, but he stood. Fawkes crossed the length of the great hall in the time it took people to start whispering, and he landed, not on the headmaster's outstretched arm, which was where he should have landed, where he always landed, where Dumbledore was clearly expecting him to land, he landed on Harry Potter's left shoulder. The hall went completely silent. Harry went completely still. The pressure in his chest, the heat, the coiled thing he'd been trying to suppress, it recognized something. He felt it the way you feel a word you've been trying to remember finally surface, that physical click of rightness. He turned his head very slowly and found himself looking directly into one enormous, burning, amber eye. Fawkes trilled. It was not a happy sound and not a sad sound. It was the sound of something necessary. Then the phoenix opened his wings, fully, both of them, a span of fire and crimson and gold that stretched nearly 4 feet on either side, and pressed his chest against Harry's, and sang one long, clear, devastating note that climbed until it was too high for human ears and kept climbing, and the light that came off him stopped being warm and became something else entirely. Harry made a sound like he'd been punched. Not because it hurt. Because it didn't, and everything in his life experience told him that something this intense should hurt, had to hurt, and the fact that it felt instead like a door being thrown open in a room that had been sealed so long it had forgotten it was a room, he went to his knees on the stone floor. The first years around him scattered backward. Someone screamed, short, cut off, and McGonagall took 3 rapid steps forward and stopped herself, because there was nothing to stop, no danger she could address, just a phoenix pressed against a first year's chest and light pouring off both of them in waves that made the air taste of lightning and crushed grass and something metallic and electric that had no name in English. Dumbledore was moving around the staff table. He was not running. He was walking very quickly and he was saying something. Fawkes, that's enough, come here now, in a voice that had lost every trace of grandfatherly warmth and become something older and harder and afraid. The hat, sitting forgotten on its stool, spoke without being placed on anyone's head. 38, it said, in a conversational tone that carried perfectly in the ringing silence. 38 blocks on a single magical core. I've been placed on heads for 1,000 years and I have never felt anything like it. The whispers broke out. Dumbledore said, more sharply, Fawkes. Fawkes turned his head and looked at Dumbledore with an expression that, on a bird's face, should not have been legible as anything in particular, and yet every person in the great hall read it perfectly. No. Harry felt them going one by one. That was the only way to describe it. There was no other language for the sensation of 38 separate constraints dissolving in sequence, each one a small implosion, a pocket of pressure releasing, 38 little silences becoming 38 little sounds. He felt them in his hands first, then his arms, then a heat in his spine that shot upward so fast he gasped, and then something cracked open in his chest that had apparently been his actual self, the real core of what he was, and it poured into the space the blocks had kept empty like water filling a carved channel. What is that? It's his magic. How much is there? The Gryffindor table had gone from whispers to open voices. Fred Weasley had his hand on George's arm without realizing it. George had leaned forward with an expression stripped entirely of irony. Ron Weasley, sitting further down the table with the particular expression of someone who'd expected his first night at Hogwarts to be extraordinary but not quite like this, had his mouth open. Hermione Granger was sitting at the Gryffindor table already. She'd sorted third in the alphabet, well before the P's, with her hands pressed flat on the wood in front of her, watching with the focused attention of someone committing every detail to memory. The light crested. Harry threw his head back and his hands came up instinctively, palms out, and the magic that poured through his newly unblocked core hit the air of the great hall like a stone hitting a still pond. Rings of invisible force rippled outward from where he knelt. Every candle flame went horizontal, then came back upright. The enchanted ceiling flared, the stars brightened briefly to midday intensity, and then everything settled, and the light faded, and Fawkes folded his wings slowly and stepped back to sit on Harry's shoulder again, looking pleased with himself in the way of creatures who are never wrong. The silence lasted 3 full seconds. Then Harry looked up. His eyes, previously the unremarkable green that the few photographs of Lily Potter showed in his mother's face, were lit from within. Not glowing like something supernatural. Lit the way a fire is lit, from a source, with depth. The green had an intensity it hadn't had before, the way a color looks different when there's something behind it. He looked at Dumbledore, who had stopped 6 feet away. "Hello," Harry said, and his voice was entirely calm, entirely even, and carried to every corner of the great hall without being raised. "Something that belongs to me just got given back. I think you know what." The air in the room shifted. Not magically. Emotionally. The kind of shift that happens when something has changed and every instinct in the room is registering it before the brain catches up. Dumbledore looked at the boy kneeling on the stone floor of his great hall, surrounded by scattered first years and 500 watching students and every member of his staff, and his expression did something complicated. "Harry," he began, in the gentle, measured tone of a man who had spent 60 years knowing exactly what to say and how to say it. "I think it might be best if we discussed this somewhere private. You put 38 blocks on my magical core," Harry said. Still calm. Still even. "You did it when I was a baby, and you maintained them for 10 years, and I want to know why. Now. Here. That is a serious accusation. It's not an accusation." Harry stood up. He did it without wobbling, without hesitation, the way a person stands when they're not afraid of what's in front of them. "Fawkes just burned off everything you put there. I can feel the difference. I felt every single one of them dissolve." 38, like the hat said. Fawkes trilled again from his shoulder, soft, affirming. "I'm afraid you've misunderstood." The magic moved. Not violently. Not explosively. It moved the way a river moves when someone removes a dam, purposeful, inevitable, finding its level. It rolled off Harry in a wave that had no color and no sound but that every magical person in the room felt in their teeth, and it touched Dumbledore, and Dumbledore, Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore, Headmaster of Hogwarts, Supreme Mugwump, Chief Warlock, Defeater of Grindelwald, went rigid. It lasted 1 second. Then Dumbledore said, in a voice that was entirely his own and entirely wrong, because the careful warmth had been stripped out of it and what remained was just truth, "I placed the blocks to control the rate at which your power developed." The hall erupted. Not into screaming. Into something louder and more immediate, 200 voices all speaking at the same pitch at the same time, a wall of sound that McGonagall sliced through with a sonorous amplified voice that still managed to sound like herself, quiet. They went quiet. McGonagall was standing between the staff table and the first years, and her expression was the one she reserved for situations that made her genuinely angry rather than professionally stern, and that expression was considerably more frightening than the stern one. She looked at Dumbledore. "Albus," she said, very carefully. "What did you just say?" Dumbledore's mouth tightened. He tried for the gentle smile and it didn't quite arrive. Something was clearly fighting in him, the locked jaw, the slight widening of the knuckles where his hands closed at his sides, and Harry watched with clear, steady attention while the man he was supposed to admire tried very hard not to say the next thing and said it anyway. The blocks were necessary. Without them, his power would have been visible from his first year of primary school. The wizarding world would have descended on him before he was ready. "The Dursleys would have, the Dursleys," Harry said. The name landed flat. "Yes," Dumbledore said, and something in his jaw was fighting very hard now. "The blood protection required you to be in their home, and the blocks were necessary to prevent. You knew what the Dursleys were like." Not a question. A statement. Precision applied like a blade. Dumbledore's face did something that was not quite shame and not quite grief and was very much both. "I believed the protection outweighed, you knew," Harry said again, "what they were like, and you sent me there anyway, and then you blocked my magic so I couldn't have even done anything about it." The truth compulsion, for that was what Harry's unblocked core had laid on the air when it moved, not intentionally, not with any training behind it, just the raw instinct of very powerful magic making itself known, had Dumbledore's jaw working like he was biting down on a word he couldn't swallow. "I had reports," he said, tightly, in the voice of a man dragged. "I had reports that suggested their treatment of you was suboptimal. I chose not to investigate further." The silence this time was different. Colder. "Suboptimal," Snape repeated, from his seat at the staff table, in a tone that made the word sound like it had been dropped from a great height onto stone. Dumbledore looked at Severus Snape with the particular look of a man who knows he has said something he cannot take back. McGonagall turned away from Dumbledore and walked to Harry in 4 crisp, even strides. She crouched, she, who never crouched, who communicated her respect through directness rather than physical accommodation, so that she was level with him, and she looked at his face with a searching intensity that had nothing in it of performance. "Are you all right?" she asked. It was such a simple question that Harry didn't know what to do with it for a moment. "Yes," he said. "I feel," he stopped. "Tried again. I feel like I've been walking around with a coat on that someone else chose and it just came off." McGonagall held his gaze for a moment longer, then stood. She turned back to the staff table, and every professor at it was watching Dumbledore with expressions ranging from confused to appalled. Flitwick had gotten to his feet on top of his books. Professor Sprout's hands were flat on the table. Professor Quirrell, sitting in the defense seat and already sweating considerably more than the warm hull warranted, was looking at his own hands. "I think," McGonagall said, in a tone that closed discussion, "that the sorting will need to pause for a moment." "Minerva," Dumbledore began. "Albus." Her voice had gone to something quiet and exact. "You have just, in front of the entire school, admitted to blocking a student's magical core for 10 years, knowingly placing him in a home where he was mistreated, and choosing not to investigate further. I think a pause is the minimum response appropriate to that information. The full context will be heard," she said, "in the context it deserves. Not here, not tonight, with 500 children watching." She looked at the first years, who were clustered near the doors in a state of collective shock that transcended even the usual first-night terror. Then she looked at Harry. "Mr. Potter. Are you willing to allow the sorting to continue tonight, with the understanding that none of this ends here?" Harry considered this for a moment in which nobody breathed. He looked at Dumbledore. Dumbledore looked back at him with the expression of a man reassessing a situation from the ground up. "Yes," Harry said. "Because I'm still here for school. But we're going to talk about all of it." "Yes," McGonagall said, with a weight that was half agreement and half something that sounded like apology. "We are." Fawkes stepped from Harry's shoulder to the air and hovered, not flapping, just present, as if the atmosphere itself were supporting him, and then glided forward and landed on the Gryffindor table just past the head, and the candles near him burned brighter, and he sat there with his eyes half closed as if he'd done something exhausting and satisfying and was now ready to rest. The sorting resumed. It was the strangest sorting in the memory of anyone present, and it produced the most memorable hat placement in 4 decades, because when Harry James Potter finally sat on the 3-legged stool and the sorting hat was placed on his head, it stayed there for exactly 2 seconds, and then said, in a voice that rang clear and certain to the back row, "Gryffindor." But that was not what made it memorable. What made it memorable was that the hat, before lifting from Harry's head, said one more thing. Not loudly. Not performing. Just truthfully, in the manner of a hat that had been placed on over 100,000 heads and had been waiting, for some of those placements, for a very long time. His potential, the hat said, is the largest I have measured since the founders. With nothing blocking it. As it should always have been. The applause from the Gryffindor table was somewhere between enthusiastic and overwhelming. Fred Weasley stood up first, which meant George stood up, which meant the twins were standing and clapping before Harry had even taken the hat off his head, and then the Gryffindor table came up in sections like a wave, and even parts of the Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff tables began to clap, not for house rivalry but because they had just witnessed something, and you clapped for something like that instinctively. Harry walked to the Gryffindor table past Dumbledore, who was still standing in the space between the staff table and the first years, and he didn't rush and he didn't look down. He met Dumbledore's eyes once, just briefly, just a single beat, and in that beat Dumbledore saw something in the boy's face that he hadn't anticipated seeing for years, possibly ever. Not hatred. Not fear. Not even defiance. Clarity. The kind that can't be replaced once you've removed whatever was obscuring it. Harry sat down beside Hermione Granger, who had been staring at him with an expression at war between academic fascination and human concern, and the sorting resumed around him, and the great hall slowly found its rhythm again, the way water finds its level. Hermione watched Fawkes, who was still sitting on the table end, preening one wing with the tranquility of a creature that had done its job and had no regrets. "That's Dumbledore's phoenix," she said quietly. "Yes," Harry said. She stopped. Started again. It came of its own accord. Fawkes. Who is Dumbledore's familiar and has been for decades, by all accounts. Came of his own accord to burn off 38 blocks that Dumbledore put there, Harry agreed. Hermione was quiet for a moment in which her expression did something very complicated. She was, fundamentally, a person who had built her entire identity on the architecture of rules and knowledge and the belief that the people in authority over those rules knew what they were doing. Tonight had taken a serious swing at that architecture. But she was also, more deeply, more fundamentally, someone who could not look at a fact and pretend it was something else. "Are you all right?" she asked, almost exactly the way McGonagall had, but quieter. "You're the second person to ask me that tonight," Harry said. "It's starting to feel like evidence." "Evidence of what?" "That something was actually wrong." He said it simply, without drama, looking down the table at the candles and the gold plates that had just filled themselves with food. "I've spent my whole life being told I was wrong. Too weird, too strange, too much. Took till tonight for anyone to suggest that maybe the wrongness wasn't mine." Hermione was quiet for 3 seconds. "Then, I'll help. With whatever you need to find out. I can research the law on magical core binding, precedents, Wisengamot cases, that would be," Harry looked at her. Genuinely looked, the way you look at someone when you're deciding whether to trust them. "That would be brilliant." "Yes." Fred Weasley leaned across the table from 2 seats up. He had the expression of someone who just received news so good he didn't know whether to laugh or swear. "Right," he said, without preamble. "Hi. Fred Weasley. That was the most interesting sorting ceremony in the history of Hogwarts and I've been here 4 years. Just so you know, we're on your side." "Absolutely," George confirmed from beside him. "Unconditionally. Whatever you need." We know where every secret passage in this castle is, Fred added. We have a map that Dumbledore doesn't know about, that shows every room and every person in the building at all times. We have extensive experience with authority figures who think they know best. We're also excellent at making things explode, George said. Which may or may not be relevant. Harry looked at them for a moment. Are you always like this? Worse, they said together. And for the first time in what Harry could honestly recall, he laughed, not a polite sound, not the careful, muffled version he'd learned at the Dursleys where showing happiness was asking for it to be taken away, but an actual laugh, surprised out of him, that drew looks from down the table and didn't make him want to take it back. Fawkes, from his end of the table, opened one amber eye and made a sound like a single warm bell note. At the staff table, Dumbledore sat back down. He picked up his goblet and set it down again without drinking. Beside him, Snape was sitting with his arms crossed and his expression sealed in the way of a man processing information by refusing to let anyone see him do it. On Dumbledore's other side, McGonagall had taken her seat but had not touched her food and was looking at a fixed point on the far wall with the focused stillness of someone making a decision. She was a woman who, in 38 years of teaching, had arranged her trust in a very particular order, her students first, the school second, and Albus Dumbledore somewhere in the top 5 because she had always believed that his love for Hogwarts and for its children was as real as hers. Tonight had not destroyed that belief. But it had cracked it, in the specific place where it connected with the boy who'd just sat down at the Gryffindor table after the most extraordinary sorting she'd ever witnessed. She thought about reports of mistreatment and chosen not to investigate further, and she thought about the 10 years those words covered, and she cut her lamb chop into pieces she did not eat with more force than the task required. The last first year sorted. The feast resumed its proper noise. And in the golden warmth of the great hall, surrounded by floating candles and a ceiling full of stars, Harry Potter ate his first proper meal at Hogwarts and felt his magic moving through him like something that had been asleep and was now very much awake and learning the shape of its new freedom. It felt, he thought, like being born. Not the messy painful kind. The other kind. The kind in stories where something wakes up and the world it wakes up in will never be quite the same. At the end of the staff table, Quirrell was methodically not looking at Harry Potter and failing at it in a way that would have been obvious to anyone paying attention. His hands were trembling slightly around his fork, and his turban sat oddly, and occasionally his expression shifted in a way that his face seemed to disagree with, as if two different people were using it in turns. And on the Gryffindor table, the Phoenix sat with his eyes closed, his fire banked to warmth, having done what he came to do. Having freed what needed freeing. The Great Hall would talk about this night for generations. They would disagree about the details, the way people disagree about the details of things they witnessed with their own eyes, because memory is not a photograph and truth is not a still image. But they would agree on this, that on the 1st of September, 1991, Fawkes the Phoenix came into the sorting ceremony uninvited, and what he burned away changed everything. Every single one of them felt it. Somewhere below the feast and the noise and the ordinary extraordinary magic of being at Hogwarts, in the deep bones of the castle itself, in the stones that had absorbed 1,000 years of magic and memory and held both without prejudice, something had shifted into alignment. Like a door, thrown open. Like a coat, coming off. Like 38 chains, falling. Chapter 2, The Weight of What Was Stolen. Harry woke up before anyone else. That surprised him. He'd spent his whole life being hauled out of his cupboard before dawn to start on breakfast, and he'd assumed that when he finally had an actual bed, an actual mattress, curtains he could close around himself like a private room within a room, he'd sleep until noon. He'd earned it, surely. 10 years of 5:30 mornings had to accumulate into some kind of debt that comfort owed him. Instead he was awake at 3:30, sitting cross-legged on top of his covers in the dark Gryffindor dormitory, and his magic was doing something he couldn't quite describe. Moving was the closest word, the way something moves when it's been still for a very long time and is now cataloging what it can reach. Like a hand flexed after a long numbness. Testing its own fingers one by one. He held out his palm in the dark and thought, light, and a small sphere of it bloomed above his hand, clean, white, about the size of a marble, completely steady. He looked at it for a moment. He thought, bigger, and it grew to the size of an orange. He thought, move, and it drifted to the left. He'd done accidental magic his whole life. The fence bending. The teacher's wig going blue. The time Dudley's gang had been chasing him and Harry had somehow ended up on the school roof. Always accidental. Always followed by confusion and punishment in equal measure, never by understanding. He'd had no framework for any of it, no language, because the Dursleys' framework had been firmly in the stop it immediately, don't be a freak category, and that wasn't a framework, that was a gag. But this, holding a light in his palm and moving it with a thought, cleanly, no wand, at 11 years old, this was something different. He could feel the difference. Like the gap between stumbling in the dark and walking in daylight. He closed his hand. The light went out. He sat in the dark for a while longer, listening to the breathing of 4 other boys he barely knew, and thought about Dumbledore's face. The way it had locked up. The way the words had come out anyway. He'd read something once, not a wizarding book, a normal school library book he'd snuck in his bag back when he'd still been allowed to use the school library before Dudley's lot had decided that was territory, about how the hardest truths to say were the ones you'd already justified to yourself 1,000 times. Because when you said them out loud to someone else, you couldn't hear them with your own ears anymore. You heard them with theirs. I chose not to investigate further. He wondered if Dumbledore was sleeping. He suspected not. He got dressed quietly, pulled on his shoes, and went to find the castle. Hogwarts at 4:30 in the morning was an entirely different building from the one that had sparkled and roared with 1,000 students at dinner. The portraits slept in their frames, not all of them, a few watched him pass with the mild interest of immortals for whom curiosity had replaced any other emotional response to novelty, but most of them were curled against their painted backgrounds in attitudes of genuine rest. The staircases moved less often, as if they too had a night mode. His footsteps on the stone sounded personal. Private. He found a window in a corridor on the 4th floor and sat in it, legs hanging over the interior side, and watched the castle grounds come slowly out of the dark as the sky went from black to the dark blue that comes just before color remembers itself. He was sitting there when Fawkes found him. The phoenix came in from somewhere. Harry hadn't tracked the direction. One moment the corridor was empty, and then there was warmth and the faint smell of clean fire, and Fawkes was there, landing on the stone windowsill beside him with the quiet precision of a bird who'd been making exactly this kind of entrance for centuries. Harry looked at him. Fawkes looked back. "You didn't have to do that for me," Harry said. "Did you?" "Nobody told you to." Fawkes made a low sound. Not a trill, lower. More conversational. "Can you even understand me?" Another sound. Distinctly amused. "Right," Harry said. "Obviously you can." He looked back out at the grounds. The Black Lake was visible now, a flat dark sheet below the hill. "Were you waiting for last night? Have you been? Did you know about the blocks before I came to Hogwarts?" Fawkes was quiet for a moment. Then he turned and pressed the side of his head very briefly against Harry's temple. It was the gentlest possible touch, like being brushed by a warm hand, and Harry felt something. Not words. Not an image. A feeling, broad and old and enormous, like standing at the edge of a cliff and understanding that the thing below you is the sea, and that the sea has always been there, will always be there, was there long before you and will be there long after, and that this is not a sad fact but a true one. He took that to mean yes. "Does Dumbledore know you came to me? On purpose?" Fawkes stepped back onto the sill and looked at him with an expression that was, unmistakably, dry. "He knows now," Harry said. "Right. Because of the whole public event of it." He rubbed the back of his neck. "I need to know more. About what he did and why, and how, and whether it's even legal." Hermione said she'd help with that. "The twins have, well, they said they have a map, which sounds useful. But I also need to know what it means." What I actually am, magically. What those 38 blocks were keeping back. He paused. That sounds arrogant. I don't mean it that way. I mean, Fawkes trilled, brief and clear. I know what you mean. I'm not trying to be, I don't want power I just want to know what's mine, Harry finished, and that was the truest version he had. Fawkes regarded him for another moment. Then he did something Harry hadn't expected. He hopped forward and sat not beside Harry but in his lap, folding himself down with the natural authority of a creature that has never been questioned about where it chooses to sit, and the warmth of him spread through Harry's cold from the stone legs like a heated blanket, and Fawkes tucked his head and was quiet, and Harry sat with a phoenix in his lap in a fourth-floor window while the sky slowly decided to be morning, and felt, cautiously but genuinely, that things were going to be different now. He was right about that, though different would turn out to cover a lot of ground. McGonagall found the office she'd asked to use at 7 in the morning, the small one off the main corridor on the second floor, used for storage mostly, which she'd cleared and set with 2 chairs and a table because her actual office wasn't sufficient for the conversation she intended to have. It was the kind of thing she did well, preparing a space. Creating the architecture for a difficult conversation before the conversation arrived. Dumbledore arrived at 7:05. He did not look like a man who'd slept. He looked like a man who'd spent the night in the process of constructing arguments, and some of them had held up better than others, and the ones that hadn't were showing on his face like hairline cracks in good pottery. He sat down with the air of a man sitting down voluntarily, which was the only kind of sitting he did, and looked at Minerva McGonagall with a look she recognized. It was the look he used when he was deciding how much to manage a conversation. She'd seen it her whole career and had always trusted it, because she'd assumed the managing was always in service of something she'd have agreed with if she'd understood it fully. She was no longer making that assumption. "How long have you known me, Albus?" she said. Not the opening he'd expected. He adjusted. 38 years as colleagues. Nearly 40 since you were my student. In that time, McGonagall said, have I ever given you cause to think I'd put my comfort above the welfare of a child in my care? No, Dumbledore said, simply. Then why, she said, did you never tell me what was happening to Harry Potter? The silence was the length of a breath. Because it was complicated, he said. Complicated, she said, in the same tone Snape had used the night before on the word suboptimal. I see. Sending an infant to people who I told you on the night we stood in that street were the worst sort of muggles, complicated. Blocking the child's magic so he could neither protect himself nor demonstrate anything unusual enough to draw outside attention, complicated. Maintaining those blocks for 10 years while having reports, Albus, having actual written reports of mistreatment that you chose not to, Minerva. His voice was still gentle. She'd always found that gentleness reassuring. Tonight it made her feel something like fury. I want to know what else, she said. All of it. Because whatever the truth compulsion that boy's magic put on you last night was, it's gone now, and if there's more, and I believe there is more, Albus, I have known you too long not to know when you're holding your cards, then I want to hear it from you, directly, before I hear it from anyone else. Dumbledore looked at her for a long moment. He looked like a man deciding between 2 versions of honesty, the partial version, which was still technically honest but curated carefully for maximum comprehension of necessity, and the full version, which had never been his preference because the full version had a way of making necessity sound like something uglier. There is a prophecy, he said. McGonagall waited. Made before Harry was born. It describes a child who will have power the Dark Lord knows not, born as the 7th month dies, to parents who have thrice defied him. It names Harry, or could name Harry. The prophecy was somewhat open to interpretation in the early days. There was also Neville Longbottom to consider, as the one with the power to vanquish Voldemort. McGonagall's expression did not change in any large way. It changed the way a wall develops a crack, invisible at first, then impossible to ignore. And the reason you blocked his magic, she said, very carefully. Partly for the protection. Partly because, Dumbledore stopped. And for the first time in 38 years of knowing him, Minerva McGonagall watched Albus Dumbledore look genuinely old. Not the comfortable distinguished old of white hair and half-moon glasses. Old in the way of someone carrying something that had gotten too heavy to carry upright. The prophecy also suggests that he must be the one to face Voldemort. That in the end, only he can defeat him. And you needed him to survive long enough to do it, McGonagall said. Yes. So the blocks were partly to protect him. Partly to ensure that when he came to Hogwarts, he was not overwhelmed. Not visible. Not a target until I could position, she repeated. Dumbledore did not flinch. But he came very close to it. You were positioning him, McGonagall said, and her voice had gone to something very quiet, which in her case was considerably more alarming than raised. Like a chess piece. You were positioning an 11-year-old boy with no knowledge of who he was, no magical ability because you'd taken it from him, no protection because you'd placed him with people. She stopped. She took a breath. What else does the prophecy say? Dumbledore was quiet. Albus. What else? That one of them must die at the hand of the other, he said. That neither can live while the other survives. The room was very still. McGonagall stood up, which she hadn't intended to do, but her body had apparently made a decision her mind was still catching up to. She walked to the window and stood with her back to Dumbledore and her hands clasped behind her back, and for a full 30 seconds she stood like that. You knew, she said, without turning around, since before he arrived at Hogwarts, that the plan ended with him either killing or dying. Or both, Dumbledore said, and the word both came out with a weight to it that told her it wasn't a casual addition. It was the weight of something he'd thought about at length. Something he'd concluded, and then built other conclusions on top of. McGonagall turned around. Get out of this office, she said. Dumbledore blinked. I need time, she said, to consider what I've heard, and I can't do that with you sitting there being reasonable at me. Get out, Albus. We'll speak again. But not now. He got up. He paused at the door. Minerva. Everything I did was, for the greater good, she said, and the phrase landed in the room like a stone in a still pool. She watched him recognize it, watched him see that she knew what it was, what it referenced, what it meant when someone started using that particular justification. I know. Get out. He got out. She sat back down and put her head in her hands and permitted herself, alone in a small and used office at 7:15 in the morning, exactly 45 seconds of being completely unable to cope. Then she straightened, smoothed her robes, and went to find Harry Potter. She found him in the Great Hall at 8, sitting at the Gryffindor table with Hermione Granger and, she noted, the two Weasley twins, both of whom had the general energy of people who'd been up for hours making plans. There was a scroll between Harry and Hermione that had writing on it in two different hands, and several books stacked to Hermione's left, and Fred had some kind of diagram that he was explaining to George in whispers. They looked less like first years and fifth years and more like a small, decided committee. Harry saw her coming and didn't tense. That was the thing she noticed first, the absence of the flinch. The flinch she would have expected from any child in his situation, coming off whatever last night had been, meeting a teacher's eye over breakfast in the aftermath. It wasn't there. He looked at her the way you look at someone you've decided is probably trustworthy but are waiting to have confirmed. She sat down across from him. Good morning, Mr. Potter. Professor McGonagall. He paused. Did you talk to him? I did. And? She considered him. She'd taught for 38 years and she knew the difference between a child performing maturity and a child who had simply, out of necessity, built it earlier than anyone should have to. This boy had not had the luxury of performing anything. His composure was load-bearing. There is a great deal more, she said. And you deserve to hear it. But I want to make certain that when you do hear it, you hear it in a structured setting, with appropriate witnesses, and with whatever support you choose to have present. Not in fragments. Harry looked at her. Then at the scroll in front of him. Hermione found 3 cases in the last century, he said, where magical core binding was performed without consent. 2 were from the ministry, both overturned on appeal, both resulting in the binding party paying reparations. The third, he glanced at Hermione. The third was a parental decision, Hermione picked up immediately, in the tone of someone who'd been waiting to be asked. Overturned when the child came of age and filed a petition. The legal language is clear, magical core binding of a minor without documented medical necessity or Wisengamot approval is an unauthorized modification of a person's natural magical state. It falls under the same statutes as, Hermione, Harry said. Unlawful magical interference with, Hermione. She stopped. Looked at him. She does this, Harry said to McGonagall. She knows all of it but she needs to be told which bit you want. Hermione made a sound of mild indignation that was clearly covering being slightly charmed. The bottom line, McGonagall said. It's illegal, Hermione said. Clearly. There's documented precedent and the statute is explicit. What was done to Harry is a criminal offense under wizarding law. McGonagall looked at the two of them, at Hermione's books and Harry's steady eyes, and the twins' diagram that she noticed, now she was close enough, was actually a map with moving dots on it. She felt something shift in her chest that was partly grief and partly something else. Something that had the shape of reassurance. Who did you tell? Harry asked. No one yet, she said. I'm telling you first. He nodded slowly. Why? Because it happened to you, she said. Because you're the one who decides what happens next. Another pause. She watched him process this, the novel concept of being the person who decides, and she watched it take hold, not explosively but quietly, the way a plant reaches toward light. Not dramatic. Just true. I want the formal inquiry, he said. The one you were going to suggest. In front of witnesses. Staff, governors, whatever the appropriate people are. And I want him to have to answer all of it, not just the blocks. The prophecy. The Dursleys. Everything he chose. McGonagall kept her face still, but she filed away the word prophecy with a cold precision. How do you know about a prophecy, she said, keeping her voice even. I don't, yet, Harry said. But when a man puts 38 blocks on a baby's magical core and spends 10 years engineering that baby's life, there's a reason for it. Either he wanted something from me, or he was afraid of something about me, or both. I'm guessing there's a prophecy because prophecies are exactly the kind of thing someone like Dumbledore would use to justify exactly what he did. He met her eyes. Am I wrong? She said nothing. He took that as the answer it was. Right, he said. So yes. Formal inquiry. Soon. Fred leaned forward from his end of the map. We can help with documentation. We've been collecting Hogwarts irregularities for 3 years, things that never quite added up, decisions that seemed strange. We thought it was just Dumbledore being eccentric. Turns out eccentric has subtext. You should also talk to the hat, George added. McGonagall frowned. The sorting hat is not it told me something last night, Harry said. After I sat down. It said things. About potential, about the blocks, it knew about them. It knew before last night, I think. I want to know what else it knows. The hat's purpose is, it's been in this castle for 1,000 years, Harry said. It's absorbed everything that's happened here. Every sorting. Every student. It sat on Dumbledore's head when he was sorted. It knows things. He said it straightforwardly, not aggressively, simply in the manner of someone stating an obvious fact. I want to talk to it. McGonagall looked at him for a moment. Then she said, I'll arrange it this morning. Thank you, Harry said, which was such a simple thing to say, and which he said with enough genuine weight that it didn't sound like a formality. She stood to leave, then paused. Mr. Potter. Last night, in the Great Hall, what you did to Dumbledore. The truth compulsion. Was that intentional? Harry was quiet for a second. No. It just happened. The magic, he looked down at his hand. It was like it recognized the lie in the air and decided to do something about it. The magic, she repeated. Yeah. And now? Can you feel it? Do you have control? He looked up. I have more control than I've ever had in my life, he said. It's not wild. It's not frightening. It's just, he flexed his hand slightly. Mine. For the first time. She held his gaze for a moment. Good, she said. And she meant it in every sense available to the word. She left. George watched her go. She's going to be brilliant, he said, to no one in particular. She's already furious, Fred corrected. Brilliant comes after furious with her. Even better. Snape came into the Great Hall at 8:45 looking like a man who had also not slept and was considerably more aggressive about it. He moved through the space with his usual quality of occupying more room than his physical dimensions suggested, came to the Gryffindor table, and stopped directly across from Harry in a way that the other students gave immediate birth. Harry looked up at him. Snape looked down at Harry. The pause between them had the texture of two people taking each other's full measure before anyone spoke. You, Snape said. Come with me. Harry didn't move. Not out of defiance, exactly, more out of the fact that he was in the middle of something, and also because it was 8:30 in the morning and he'd been awake since 4 and hadn't finished his toast. After breakfast, he said. Snape's eyes narrowed. I'm not in the habit of rescheduling, Professor, Harry said, still entirely pleasant. I'm 11. I haven't eaten since last night. Whatever you need to say to me, it can wait 12 minutes. The twins had gone very still in the way of people watching something that could go several directions. Snape stared at him. There was something moving behind those eyes, not anger, precisely. Something more complex. He'd walked across the Great Hall to confront a first year out of what appeared to be genuine urgency, which was not characteristic, and now the first year was eating toast at him. 12 minutes, Snape said, and walked to the staff table, and sat down, and poured himself tea with enough precision to constitute a statement. He's scared of you, Fred said, quietly, once Snape was out of earshot. He's not scared of me, Harry said, taking a bite. He's scared of what he heard last night. He's scared of what else is going to come out. What makes you say that? Harry chewed, thought, swallowed. Because he was a student here, right? Under Dumbledore? And whatever Dumbledore's been running, Snape's been part of it, one way or another. And now the walls are cracking and he wants to know how much of what he thought was real actually was. Hermione, who had been listening while organizing her notes, set down her quill and said, That's remarkably perceptive for someone who only met him last night. I grew up with people who had everything to hide, Harry said, without self-pity, just as a fact. You learn to read the ones who are scared of exposure. He finished his toast, drank his pumpkin juice, and stood up. Right, he said to the twins. Don't let anyone take that map. And Hermione, can you look up the formal process for requesting a Hogwarts Board of Governors inquiry? Not just a staff inquiry. Full governors. Hermione had already written it down. Yes. I'll have it for you before lunch. You're incredible, Harry said, with complete sincerity, and she went slightly pink and bent back over her books. He walked to the staff table. Snape stood without waiting to be asked to and led him out of the Great Hall, down a side corridor, and into a classroom that was empty at this hour, not his own dungeon classroom, Harry noticed, which would have been the obvious choice. A neutral space. Snape closed the door. He stood at the front of the room with his arms folded and looked at Harry with the specific expression of a man doing an assessment he didn't particularly want to do. What do you know? Snape said. About what specifically? About Dumbledore. About the blocks. About, a short pause. About why? A prophecy, Harry said. I don't know the exact wording. I know there is one. I know it has something to do with Voldemort and with me, and I know Dumbledore's been managing my entire life around it. Snape's jaw moved. You knew about the prophecy, Harry said. Not a question. Snape said nothing, which was its own answer. Did you know about the blocks? A longer pause this time. And when Snape spoke, it was in a voice that had had all the performance stripped out of it, leaving something that was raw in the way old wood is raw, not soft, but genuinely unfinished. No. I knew he was with the Muggles. I argued against it. I was overruled. But the blocks, his mouth thinned. No. I did not know. Harry looked at him steadily. But you know more than you've said. Yes. Will you tell me? The silence this time was long enough to have its own weather. Snape looked at him, Harry thought, like he was searching for something. For Lily, maybe. Everyone who looked at him long enough was looking for Lily. He'd gathered that from enough sideways glances in Diagon Alley, from the way Hagrid had gone quiet for a moment in the wand shop, from the specific texture of Dumbledore's gaze, which was never quite looking at Harry but always at the space around him where a memory used to stand. Your mother, Snape said, was one of the most gifted witches of her generation. Perhaps of several generations. When the prophecy was made, he stopped. His face tightened. When information from that prophecy reached Voldemort. Your parents were targeted because of it. Because of information that he stopped again. And Harry, watching him, understood. You're the one who heard it, Harry said. And told Voldemort. Snape looked at him like a man waiting to be hit. And then what? Harry said. You changed sides. I went to Dumbledore. Yes. And he forgave you. He gave me a position and a purpose, Snape said, and those were two very different things and both of them knew it. So Dumbledore had leverage on you, Harry said. Snape's expression went very briefly complicated and came back controlled. You could see it that way. I'm seeing it accurately, Harry said. I'm not saying he's evil. I'm saying he had leverage on a lot of people and he used it carefully and called it greater good. He looked at the empty classroom. The question is whether you want to still be leveraged, or whether you want to be something else. Snape looked at him for a long moment. You're 11, he said, and this time it came out less like a dismissal and more like someone stating a fact that they found genuinely disorienting. Yeah, Harry said. Imagine what I'll be like at 17. The corner of Snape's mouth moved, which was the most expressive his face got in that direction. Your mother would have said something like that. Was she like me? In some ways. A pause. She was extraordinary. And no one tried to contain her. He said it with a quality of specific bitterness that answered a question Harry hadn't asked yet. She was allowed to be what she was. And I wasn't, Harry said. Snape said nothing. So help me, Harry said. Not because you owe me. Not because of my mum. Because it's the right thing and you know it. Another long silence. Snape moved, walked to the window, looked out at the grounds, at the September morning that was clear and cold and honest in the way of early autumn, and when he turned back he had the look of a man who'd made a decision by accepting something he'd been refusing. The full text of the prophecy, he said. I heard half of it. Dumbledore knows the full version. At the inquiry you're evidently planning, he said this as if he'd been present for that conversation, which he clearly hadn't, which meant he'd been listening to something, which was information in itself. You'll want him to recite it in full. Under the compulsion if necessary. Can I do that? Harry said. The compulsion. At will? I don't know. You couldn't yesterday. Yesterday it was raw instinct. He studied Harry. You'd need to learn to control it. Channel it deliberately. A beat. I could teach you. Harry looked at him. Not because of your mother, Snape said, preemptively. Because knowledge deployed without control is just noise. Harry nodded. All right, he said. Yes. I'd want that. They stood in a narrow room with autumn light coming through old glass, a potions professor and an 11-year-old who'd woken up that morning into the first day of his real life, and came to an arrangement that Dumbledore, watching from whatever careful distance his damaged authority now permitted, would not have predicted and could not have prevented. The castle, as if noting the development, let the morning light through a high window at exactly the right angle to light the room a warm gold. The sorting hat was brought to a spare office at 10 o'clock by a McGonagall who placed it on the table with the care of someone handling an object they'd long taken for granted and were now reconsidering. Harry sat down across from it. Hermione was allowed to stay, he'd asked. McGonagall had seen no reason to refuse, and she sat in the corner with her notebook and her expression of earnest scholarly attention. Hello, Harry said to the hat. The hat opened its brim. Hello, Harry Potter. I was wondering when you'd come. You knew I would. I suspected. The Phoenix tends to start conversations, not finish them. The brim creased in what might have been a smile. You want to know what I know? Yes. Ask, the hat said. I have 1,000 years and very little to hide. Unlike most inhabitants of this castle. Harry put his hands flat on the table. The blocks. When you were placed on my head last night, you felt them. 38 of them. Yes. Each one felt like, the hat paused, which was interesting because sorting hats presumably didn't pause often. Like a door. A small door nailed shut. Your core wasn't empty underneath them. It was very full. It had simply been pressing against 38 closed doors for 10 years and had nowhere to go. Who placed them? The magic signature was Dumbledore's. I'd know it anywhere. I've sat on his head. Hermione's quill scratched furiously in the corner. When he was sorted, Harry said, how old was he? What did you see? Albus Dumbledore was sorted in 1922, the hat said, in the slightly nostalgic tone of someone opening an old book. He was brilliant, which he already knew. He was ambitious, which he didn't quite admit. He was someone who had already, at 11, decided that his intelligence made him responsible for outcomes beyond himself. That is a very particular kind of 11-year-old. The kind who grows up thinking he knows best, Harry said. The kind who grows up thinking that knowing best is the same as being right, the hat said, and that distinction landed in the room and sat there. Did he used to be different? Harry asked. Before Grindelwald, the hat said simply. Yes. He was brilliant and arrogant and genuinely joyful. After, he became brilliant and arrogant and afraid. And an afraid man with great power and no one to check him, builds blocks, Harry said. Builds everything, the hat said. Systems. Plans. 60-year architectures. He genuinely loves Hogwarts. He genuinely wants the world to be safe. I don't think you should doubt that. It paused again. But he stopped believing, somewhere along the way, that the people he was trying to protect had the right to participate in their own protection. You became pieces of a plan rather than people. And that is where the love became something else. Harry was quiet for a moment. The prophecy. Do you know it? I know he carries the weight of it. I don't know the words. Prophecies don't sit in hats, they sit in the Department of Mysteries and in the minds of the people they concern. The brim creased. But I know this, whatever it says, you are not an instrument. Whatever role it assigns you, you are a person first. And that is something he forgot. Hermione set down her quill very carefully. Thank you, Harry said, and stood. Harry, the hat said. He stopped. The stone in this castle. In the third-floor corridor. You know not to go there, a pause. Go there. Soon. Before the wrong person does. Harry stared at it. What, I'm a hat, it said, not an oracle. But I've been in this castle a long time, and I can feel when something has been placed somewhere because someone wants it to be found by one particular person. You'll understand when you get there. The brim closed. Then, muffled, also, the Ravenclaw ghost knows more about magical core binding than any book in the library. Find her. The brim closed fully. Harry looked at Hermione. Hermione looked at Harry. The stone, she said. The third-floor corridor. That's the one Dumbledore specifically told everyone not to go near on pain of death. Yes, Harry said. The Philosopher's Stone, she said, and the way she said it had the quality of something that had been circling in her mind since the feast and had just landed. Flamel. Nicholas Flamel. I read about the vault break-in at Gringotts in the Prophet on Harry's birthday. Vault 713. And the vault was emptied before the break-in. She was talking quickly now, the way she did when pieces were connecting. Dumbledore moved it. He moved it here. And put it in the third-floor corridor, Harry said. Behind a door he told every student in the school specifically not to open. They looked at each other. He told them not to open it, Harry said, in a room full of 11 to 17-year-olds. Knowing full well that at least some of them would open it, Hermione said. Which means, the door was never a deterrent, Harry said. It was a test. Or bait. He thought about this for a moment. Which means someone is supposed to find it. Which means someone is supposed to try to take it. Which means, there's something beyond the door, Hermione said. Traps. Challenges. Designed by Dumbledore, Harry said. And probably some of the other professors. He picked up his bag. We need to see that corridor. Today. Hermione said, and her expression was one part scholarly concern and one part the particular excitement of someone who had read an enormous amount about rule-breaking and was approaching her first practical application. Today, Harry said. But not alone. Bring the twins. She straightened her robes. Picked up her notebook. Then, with the decisive energy of someone who'd made peace with a decision, all right. Yes. Let's go. They walked out of the office into the castle's bright morning corridors, two 11-year-olds with a map, a notebook, and a phoenix that was almost certainly following them from a floor above, and the Hogwarts stones hummed beneath their feet with the particular resonance of very old magic recognizing something it had been waiting for. Chapter 3, What the Hat Remembers. The third-floor corridor smelled like something between a stone cellar and a storm. Harry noticed it before he noticed anything else. That particular quality of air that meant magic, old magic, the kind that had been sitting in one place long enough to stop performing and just become. He'd noticed smells his whole life the way people notice things when other senses are being deliberately limited. The Dursleys had kept him small and quiet and invisible, and his world had contracted to a cupboard, so he'd learned to read the textures of things. The way Petunia's perfume changed when she was angry versus merely disappointed. The way the house smelled different on Dudley's birthday versus any other day. The way the school library smelled like the only safe place within walking distance. This corridor smelled like power under pressure. Fred was at his shoulder and George at his other side, and Hermione was behind with her notebook clutched to her chest, not because she was afraid, she'd made clear, but because she was documenting. There was a difference, apparently. Map shows 3 people in this corridor in the last 24 hours, Fred said, looking at the parchment, which was spread between them and was, Harry thought, one of the most extraordinary objects he'd encountered so far, and he'd encountered quite a lot in the last 2 days. The dots moved in real time. Labeled. Every room named. He could see Albus Dumbledore moving through his office 4 floors above them and Minerva McGonagall in her own office and, interestingly, and he'd noted this, Professor Quirrell currently standing completely still in a room on the 7th floor with no apparent reason for being there. 3 people, Harry said. Who? Dumbledore, twice, George said. And Quirrell once. Last night. About an hour after the feast. Harry looked at the door at the end of the corridor. It was large, heavy, banded with iron, and very deliberately ordinary in the way that things built to be overlooked usually were, the kind of door your eye wanted to slide past. He walked up to it. "It's warded," Hermione said, behind him. "Several layers. Do you feel them?" He did. Not with his hands, with the thing in his chest that had been uncorked last night and was now in the process of learning what it could reach. The wards were like a texture in the air, stiff, purposeful, anchored at the corners of the frame. But there was something underneath them. Something that was not Dumbledore's magic and was older than the wards and was, in fact, the reason the wards were there. "The stone," he said. "You can feel it?" Hermione said, and she was writing. "Not the stone exactly. Just that there's something behind all of this that," he looked for the word. "Wants to be somewhere specific. It's got a quality. Like it's been moved recently and it knows it." "Magical objects that have existed for 700 years, Hermione said, still writing, "are documented in several texts as developing a form of latent awareness. Flamel's work on the stone specifically mentions, Hermione. Right. Bottom line. Yes, it can probably sense displacement." Fred had been studying the ward structure with the focused attention of someone who'd spent 3 years learning what shouldn't be possible and doing it anyway. "These are interconnected," he said. "There's a sequence to them. Dumbledore's outermost ward, then," he frowned. "This one's Flitwick. And this is Sprout, I think, earth-anchored. And here," he stopped. "What?" Harry said. "This one's not a teacher's," Fred said, slowly. "The signature is too. It's got that specific quality of someone who's good because they've had to be good rather than because they were trained properly." He looked at George. George was looking at the map. "Quirrell," George said. "It's Quirrell's." They all looked at each other. "Why," Harry said, quietly, "would Quirrell be one of the people protecting what's behind this door, and also one of only 3 people who's visited this corridor, and also be currently standing completely motionless in an empty room on the 7th floor?" "You already know why," Hermione said, and her voice was careful. "Don't you?" He did. He'd had the seed of it since the feast, the way Quirrell had looked at him, the way his expression had shifted in those wrong, mistimed ways, the turban sitting oddly, the sense of something wearing a face that wasn't entirely its own. He'd felt it with the new clarity his unblocked magic gave him, like a bad note in an otherwise normal piece of music. Something in that room that didn't harmonize. "Someone is using Quirrell," he said. "Or is Quirrell trying to get to the stone?" "Voldemort," Fred said, and he said it the way people who'd grown up in the war's shadow sometimes said it, flatly, unflinchingly, but with weight behind the flatness. "Probably," Harry said. "And Dumbledore either knows and is counting on it, or knows and is hoping his defenses are enough, or," he stopped. "Or he put the stone here specifically because he thought I'd be the one who'd eventually have to come for it." Hermione looked at him. "Bait. He's been setting things up for a long time," Harry said. 11 years, at minimum. Maybe more." He looked at the door. "I'm going to come back here. But not today, not without knowing more about what's beyond it. Fred, George, can you map the interior? Is the map that detailed?" "The map shows every room and every person in every room," George said. "But it can't show us what's in a room if nobody's in it. We'd need to go through." "Soon," Harry said. "We'll go soon. But first I need to know more about Quirrell." They walked back down the corridor, and the stone smelled of old power behind them, and Harry didn't look back, because looking back was a habit he was actively trying to unlearn. What he didn't see, because she was very good at not being seen, was the grey lady drifting through the wall 6 feet behind them, watching Harry Potter with the particular attention of someone who had been waiting a very long time for a specific kind of visitor. She'd heard the hat had pointed him her way. She'd been thinking about whether to find him first. She made her decision. Mr. Potter, said a voice that was cold in the way of all ghost voices, which was not malicious cold but the simple temperature of something that had stopped being warm several centuries ago. Harry turned. The grey lady was tall, angular, dressed in the fashion of 500 years ago, and had the expression of someone who had been beautiful in life and was now, in death, something more interesting than beautiful. She looked at him with sharp grey eyes that were considerably more present than most ghosts managed. Helena Ravenclaw, Hermione breathed, barely audible. The Grey Lady. Daughter of Rowena Ravenclaw. She's in Hogwarts, a history, I know who I am, Helena said, drily, to Hermione. Then she looked at Harry. The hat suggested you find me. Yes, Harry said. You know about magical core binding. I know about many things, she said. But yes, specifically that. My mother was one of 3 witches in her era who documented the effects of magical restriction on developing cores. The research was never widely published because the era had certain perspectives on what constituted appropriate magical power in certain kinds of people. Her expression went briefly to something sharp and bitter. Women. Muggle-borns. Children with unusual or unstable manifestations. They restricted people they were afraid of, Harry said. They called it management, Helena said, and the word came out with 100 years of opinion behind it. Would you like to walk? I find conversations about history move better when you move with them. They walked. The twins fell back slightly, not excluded, just giving space with the instincts of people who understood the difference between a conversation and a briefing. Hermione stayed at Harry's shoulder, writing. The blocks on your core, Helena said, drifting alongside him with that slightly wrong quality of movement all ghosts had, the fraction of a second behind where physics said they should be. 38 is extraordinary. As a number. The highest documented case in my mother's research was 12. What does the number mean, exactly? Harry asked. Each block is specific, she said. Not a general suppression, that would be cruder and less stable. Specific blocks target specific types of magical output. Intention magic. Perception magic. Projection. Warding. Whatever the blocker wishes to prevent must be individually addressed. 38 blocks means whoever placed them had a very detailed understanding of what you were capable of. Harry absorbed this. He knew. Before I was born, or just after. He knew exactly what I could do. Or he inferred it from the prophecy and mapped the blocks to the inference, Helena said. Either way, yes. Someone who placed 38 individual precise blocks on an infant's magical core was not doing it quickly or carelessly. That is a procedure of hours. Possibly days. With an infant. The silence that followed was the kind that had weight. My mother's research also documented the long-term effects, Helena continued, and she said it in the same measured tone, which somehow made it worse. Children whose cores were blocked significantly did not merely develop more slowly magically. They developed differently emotionally. Magic and self are not separate in a developing wizard. Blocking the magic restricts the self. The research showed increased incidences of feeling like you don't fit, Harry said. Of not quite understanding what you are or what you're feeling or why things happen around you. Helena looked at him. Yes. Precisely. 10 years of that, Fred said, quietly, from behind them. Nobody said anything. Harry walked for a moment in that quiet, and then he said, and it was not with self-pity, just the tone of someone doing an inventory, he took 10 years. Not of magic. Of knowing who I was. That's what the blocks actually did. Yes, Helena said. And now I have them back. Yes. She paused. I should tell you, the removal of long-standing blocks of that magnitude is not typically instantaneous in its effects. Most restricted witches and wizards, when their cores were freed in documented cases, needed months to understand and integrate what had been returned. You seem, I'm integrating faster, Harry said. Significantly faster, she agreed, and there was something in her voice that was not quite surprise but was adjacent to it. Your core it is unusually self-organizing. It's not trying to expand into new territory. It's reclaiming familiar territory. As if some part of you knew the full shape of what you were, even with the blocks in place. Knew it and was waiting. Harry thought about this. About waking at 4 in the morning and making a light in the dark. About the ease of it. About the rightness. Is that normal? Hermione asked, because Hermione asked the questions that needed asking. No, Helena said. It is not. She stopped walking and turned to face Harry fully, which ghosts rarely did. I'm going to tell you something, and I want you to understand that I am telling you because the Hat trusts you, and the Hat's judgment has never failed in 1,000 years, not once. Not in my experience. All right, Harry said. The magical signature that the Phoenix burned away last night, the blocks, had a secondary function that wasn't protective or containment-based. It was connective. She held his gaze. The blocks were not just limiting what you could do. They were bound to something else. Something external. When they burned away, that something lost its connection, Harry said slowly. Yes. To me specifically. Yes. She paused. I believe, and this is inference, I want to be clear, I believe the blocks may have been part of a larger magical structure. Something involving the Dark Lord's own magic. Something that relied on those 38 connections remaining intact. The corridor was very quiet. You're saying, Hermione said, her voice carefully controlled, that the blocks weren't just restricting Harry. They were, tethering him. To something in Voldemort's magical structure. I'm saying it's possible, Helena said. And if true, then their removal last night was not only Harry being freed. It was something in the architecture of Voldemort's survival. She stopped. Being altered. Fred and George were both absolutely still. Harry looked at his hands. At the magic he could feel moving quietly through him, warm and present and entirely his own. Fawkes knew, he said. Not a question. The Phoenix is a creature of profound magical intuition, Helena said. He would have felt the structure. Would have known what the blocks actually were, even if we are only inferring it now. And Dumbledore, Harry said. Does he know this part? Helena looked at him steadily. He built the blocks. He would have known what they connected to. Another silence. Longer. So he not only knew, Harry said, but he deliberately built, what? A magical connection between me and Voldemort. Using 38 blocks that suppressed who I was. And maintained them for 10 years. He said each sentence with the careful pace of someone building a structure they want to be sure will hold before they put weight on it. And when I ask why, the answer is probably in the full text of the prophecy that I still don't have. Yes, Helena said. Then that's what I need at the inquiry, Harry said. Not just the confession about the blocks. The full text. Every word. Helena nodded, once, with the formality of an older era. I'll be a witness, if you want one. I've been here 500 years. I've watched this castle's headmasters make choices, some good, some terrible. I have never seen a child manipulated so completely. Thank you, Harry said. Don't thank me, she said, already drifting back toward the wall. Free yourself thoroughly. That'll be thanks enough. She passed through the stone and was gone. The four of them stood in the corridor. Right, George said, after a moment. I need to sit down. Same, Fred said. The inquiry, Harry said. How do we make it happen? McGonagall said she'd arrange it, but I want to understand the structure. Hermione. Hermione flipped several pages in her notebook. A formal Hogwarts Board of Governors inquiry can be called by any two senior staff members jointly, or by the headmaster, or, she looked up. By a petition from any student who has suffered documented harm as a result of staff conduct. With supporting witnesses. It goes to the full board and they appoint an independent inquisitor. 2 senior staff, Harry said. McGonagall's one. Who's the second? Flitwick, Fred said immediately. He argued with Dumbledore 3 years ago about the school's approach to certain protective enchantments. We overheard. He thought, that Dumbledore was too involved in the school's day-to-day magical structure. He'd want to know about this. And Snape, Harry said. The twins blinked. He told me things this morning, Harry said. He was angry about the blocks. He didn't know about them. He might not sign a petition against Dumbledore directly, but he won't block one either. Snape, Fred said slowly, testing the word in a new configuration. He's not on our side, Harry said. But he's not on Dumbledore's the way he used to be. That's enough for now. Hermione was writing. We need to move quickly, she said. Before Dumbledore has time to manage things. To speak privately with each member of staff. To do what he does, which is make individual conversations feel like the full picture when they're only the fraction he wants you to see. Harry looked at her. How do you know he does that? I read extensively, she said. Including 3 biographies of Dumbledore, 2 of which were very complimentary and 1 of which asked some questions the other 2 didn't. The complimentary ones made me trust him. The questioning one made me think about why the other 2 felt so complete. She paused. I think I trusted him because the books told me to. I hadn't thought about that until last night. That's important, Harry said. Knowing you trusted a version of someone that was curated. She looked at him. Did you trust him? I didn't know him, Harry said. He was a name. A portrait on chocolate frogs. By the time I met him in person, I'd already been sorted in front of 500 people and watched his phoenix burn his secrets off me. That's not a trust-building sequence. Hermione almost smiled. Almost. They started moving again, toward the main stairs, away from the corridor and its pressured stone air. The map in Fred's hands showed dots moving, and Harry noted that Dumbledore's dot had stopped in the middle of the second-floor corridor, which was close to where they were, and then moved deliberately away, and he filed that away as information about what the old man was choosing to do and choosing not to do. He was giving Harry space. Which meant he was also buying himself time. The inquiry, Harry decided, needed to happen by end of the week. 5 days. That was enough. Flitwick was in his classroom reorganizing bookshelves by charm when Harry knocked on the open door. The little professor looked around and did a small involuntary thing with his expression that was the Flitwick equivalent of being surprised. He wasn't a man who was surprised easily, which made the reflex interesting. Mr. Potter, he said. I was going to look for you this afternoon. I found you first, Harry said. Flitwick looked at him for a moment with bright, sharp eyes that had dueling champion behind them, the kind of eyes that saw fast and catalogued accurately. Then he looked at Hermione, who was in the doorway, then at the twins behind her. Come in, then, he said, stepping down from his stack of books. All of you. Shut the door. He listened. He listened in the way of someone who'd already been thinking about something from one direction and was now receiving information that confirmed it from another. He asked one question, the Grey Lady said tethered. And when Harry said yes, he was quiet for a moment. The magical architecture of what you're describing, Flitwick said, carefully. The blocks as connective tissue. The deliberate placement. The prophecy as rationale. He looked at his hands, small, dexterous, the hands of someone who'd built a career on precise magical control. When the war was at its height, there were theories about why certain dark artifacts maintained stability. About what sustained Voldemort's power even through defeats. I dismissed some of those theories as post-war catastrophizing. A pause. I'm reconsidering. The Horcruxes, Hermione said. Flitwick looked at her sharply. I read Dark Magical Theory for exactly 20 minutes in the restricted section last year before they took the book away, she said, in the tone of someone who considered 20 minutes a reasonable scholarly basis for assertion. Horcruxes. Soul fragments bound into objects. The reason he didn't die in Godric's Hollow. That knowledge is restricted, Flitwick said. For good reason. Is it restricted because it's dangerous or because someone wants it restricted? Harry asked. Flitwick looked at him for a long moment. Both, he said. But your question's the right one. If I'm connected to his magic, Harry said. If the blocks were, tethering, like Helena said. Then I might be, don't, Flitwick said, sharply. Then, more gently, don't go down that road until you have more information. I'll look into it. Tonight. Separately from everything else. He looked at them all. The inquiry. McGonagall will sign. I'll sign. That's your 2 senior staff. You'll do it? Harry said. Mr. Potter, Flitwick said, with the precision of a small man who had never been less than exactly what he was. I have spent 31 years teaching in this castle under Albus Dumbledore's authority. I have trusted him more than I've trusted most. But there are things he has done, decisions he's made, that I accepted because I assumed the full picture justified them. What you're describing isn't the full picture being complicated. He looked at Harry directly. It's the full picture being hidden. I won't be part of that anymore. Harry nodded. End of week, he said. Can you make it happen by Friday? Thursday, Flitwick said. Harry blinked. Thursday, Flitwick repeated, with the energy of a man who decided to commit and was going all the way. Give him less time, not more. I'll send the formal notice today. They left. The twins were wearing the expressions of people who'd expected a long diplomatic process and had instead gotten 30 minutes of direct action from a half-goblin dueling champion. He's brilliant, George said. He was always brilliant, Fred said. Turns out brilliance without direction is different from brilliance with it. They separated in the main hallway, the twins to their own year's common room, where Fred had noted there were some documents worth reviewing, Hermione to the library, because there was more to research and she'd identified 4 books and 2 scroll archives that needed addressing before Thursday, and Harry toward the grounds, because he needed to think and he thought better moving than standing. He was out by the lake when Neville Longbottom found him. Neville was the kind of presence you didn't immediately register, not because he was small or quiet but because he moved through the world with the specific apologetic quality of someone who'd been told they were in the way so consistently they'd started leading with the apology. He'd been sorted into Gryffindor the previous evening during the initial part of the sorting, before everything had happened, and Harry had noticed him then, something about the way the boy carried himself, wound tight like someone braced for impact. Hi, Neville said. He was standing 10 feet away with his hands in his pockets looking like he was prepared to leave if requested. Sorry. I saw you come out here and I wanted to. You don't have to. Sit down, Harry said, gesturing at the grass beside him. Neville sat. He looked at the lake. Last night was extraordinary, Neville said, carefully. Yes. The hat said your potential was the largest it had measured since the founders. Yes. Mine was, Neville stopped. Started again. When it was placed on my head. Before yours. The hat said, it said I had more than I thought I did. That I'd been told wrong things about myself. He looked at Harry sideways. My grandmother's been testing me since I was 6. She thinks I'm not much of a wizard. She compares me to my father. Harry looked at him. My parents are in St. Mungo's, Neville said, quietly. They were, Bellatrix Lestrange. When I was a baby. They've been there my whole life. He said it without drama, in the flat tone of a fact lived with for so long it had become furniture. And my grandmother, she's not cruel. She just, he stopped again. She wanted you to be them, Harry said. And you're not them. You're you. Neville looked at him. There was something in his expression that was raw in the way of a bruise, the specific hurt of being seen accurately by someone who isn't trying to fix you. Your parents were good people, Harry said. Mine were too. From everything I've heard. They both died or worse because Voldemort chose them. And their kids ended up in situations that were shaped by that. But you're not your father. And I'm not my dad. And neither of us owes anyone a specific version of who we are. Neville was quiet. Can you do magic? Harry asked. Properly. Not how your grandmother measures it. Neville thought about this with the seriousness of someone not accustomed to being asked their genuine opinion. Plants, he said. I can do anything with plants. My herbology was, before I even knew there was a technical name for what I was doing. I've been growing things since I was 4. That's magic, Harry said. That's significant magic done without training. He looked at the lake. The hat said you'd been told wrong things about yourself. Maybe what you're is not a lesser version of your father. Maybe you're a first version of yourself and you've been too busy measuring against him to notice. Neville stared at him. What? Harry said. You've been here 2 days, Neville said. How are you? I spent 10 years in a cupboard, Harry said. You think a lot in a cupboard. You figure out what's actually true versus what people keep telling you because the truth is inconvenient. He shrugged. Turns out most things you get told about yourself when you're small are more about the person talking than the person they're talking about. Neville was quiet for a long moment. Then, what's happening? With Dumbledore. The inquiry. You heard about it already? The whole school's heard about it already, Neville said. Hogwarts has better information distribution than the Daily Prophet. There's going to be a formal inquiry on Thursday, Harry said. Flitwick and McGonagall are calling it. Dumbledore is going to have to answer for what he did. What he's been doing. He paused. Your parents. The Lestranges who tortured them, do you know how they were caught? Neville frowned. They were found a few days after it happened. Reported. By whom? Neville stopped. I don't know. Find out, Harry said. Before Thursday. Ask your grandmother. Write to her today. He looked at Neville steadily. I think there are a lot of threads that connect back to the same hands. And I think you deserve to know where your thread goes. Neville looked at him for a long moment with the expression of someone deciding. Not quickly, he was not a quick decider by nature, Harry could tell, but thoroughly. I'll write her tonight, he said. Good, Harry said. They sat by the lake in the September afternoon, 2 11-year-olds shaped by the same war from different angles, and the water was flat and grey and the squid surfaced once and went back down and somewhere above them the castle held its 38 years of careful secrets and waited, as old buildings wait, for what came next. What came next arrived in the form of an owl. It landed on Harry's knee at 3:30 with the peremptory attitude of a school owl confident in its institutional authority. The letter attached to its leg had Dumbledore's handwriting on the outside, elegant, spare, nothing performative about it. Harry opened it. Dear Harry, I would very much like to speak with you privately before the formal inquiry on Thursday. I am not asking to change your mind, or to manage your expectations, or to preempt anything. I am asking because there are things I should have said long before now, and saying them to you directly, rather than through the formal proceedings, feels like the minimum I owe you. Come to my office this evening, if you're willing. 7 o'clock. You are free to bring whoever you choose. Albus Dumbledore. Harry read it twice. Then he passed it to Neville, who read it and passed it back. Are you going? Neville asked. Harry folded the letter. Yes, he said. But I'm not going to let him confess on his own terms. Whatever he tells me tonight gets said again on Thursday. He knows that, Neville said. I know he knows that, Harry said. He's going because he wants to see me. Not because he's managing anything. The managing is over. He looked up at the castle. I think he's going because he's scared and he doesn't know what to do with scared, and this is the closest he can get to asking for something without saying the word. Neville looked at him. What? Harry said again. Nothing, Neville said. Just thinking that the Sorting Hat was right. The afternoon light was gold and long across the grass, and the castle rose above them into a sky going slowly pink at the edges, and somewhere inside it Dumbledore sat in his office with his fingers laced, and a phoenix that was no longer on his perch, and 60 years of plans built from certainty that had just discovered the ground it stood on was softer than he'd thought. And Harry Potter sat by the lake with his magic moving warm through his chest, and thought about what he was going to say at 7 o'clock, and felt, for the first time in his life, entirely ready. Chapter 4, Confessions in Firelight. Dumbledore's office was exactly what Harry had expected and nothing like it. He'd expected the accumulated grandeur, the portraits of former headmasters sleeping in their frames, the silver instruments that spun and smoked on their delicate tables, the vast desk with its patina of authority, the shelves that curved up the circular walls carrying the weight of decades in leather and parchment. He'd read about the office. Hermione had described it from Hogwarts, a history on the train with the thoroughness of someone reading aloud from a travel guide. What he hadn't expected was the quality of the silence inside it. Most silences were empty. This one was full. It had the dense, pressurized quality of a room where a great deal of thinking had been done over a very long time, where the air itself had absorbed argument and grief and calculation until it had its own texture. The fire in the grate was the loudest thing in the room, and it threw amber light across everything, and in that light Dumbledore looked genuinely old in a way the Great Hall's candles hadn't shown him. Not diminished. Just old. The kind of old that comes from having chosen the weight rather than having had it placed on you. Harry had brought Hermione. And the twins. He'd told them beforehand that they were there as witnesses, not participants. This conversation was his, and he'd run it his way, and the twins had agreed with the seriousness of people who understood what serious looked like when it wasn't performed. Hermione had agreed by opening her notebook, which was her version of formal agreement. They sat in the chairs Dumbledore had arranged in a curve before the fire. Dumbledore sat across from them. Fawkes was not on his perch, Harry had noticed immediately, and had seen Dumbledore notice him noticing. He comes and goes as he chooses, Dumbledore said, about the empty perch, before Harry could ask. I know, Harry said. He chose to come to me. A brief pause. He did, Dumbledore said. Yes. Harry looked at him. In the firelight, with the silence around them and no audience and no performance, Dumbledore had a quality that was harder to read than the version Harry had met in the Great Hall. The Great Hall version had been caught, exposed, stripped of his careful framing in real time and in public. This version had had 2 days to sit with what had been stripped, and the result was not a man who'd rebuilt his defenses. It was something more interesting, a man who'd decided, perhaps for the first time in a very long time, not to. You wanted to talk to me directly, Harry said. So talk. Dumbledore looked at him for a moment. He looked the way people look when they've prepared something and are suddenly not sure any of the preparation applies. The prophecy, he said. Full text, Harry said. No curation. Dumbledore's jaw shifted, but he nodded. Then he spoke, and his voice was steady and quiet, and the words filled the warm room with the cold specific weight of things that were true whether you wanted them to be or not. The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord approaches, born to those who have thrice defied him, born as the 7th month dies, and the Dark Lord will mark him as his equal, but he will have power the Dark Lord knows not, and either must die at the hand of the other for neither can live while the other survives. The one with the power to vanquish the Dark Lord will be born as the 7th month dies. The fire cracked once. Settled. Hermione's quill was moving. Harry sat with it. He'd known the shape of it already, from what Snape and Helena had told him, from the inference he'd built himself, but hearing it in full was different from knowing the shape. Hearing it made it dimensional. Made it real in the particular way that explicit language makes things real, not more true than they were before, but more solid. Less deniable. Either must die at the hand of the other. He looked at Dumbledore. How long have you known the full text? He said. Since it was given, Dumbledore said. 1980. A year before you were born. And the blocks? When did you place them? 3 days after your parents were killed, Dumbledore said. When I placed you with your aunt. 3 days, Harry said. You put a newborn in a house you knew was unsafe, and then you went back 3 days later and put 38 magical constraints on a sleeping baby, and you did it because of a prophecy that you'd had for a year and a half and hadn't told my parents fully about. Something shifted in Dumbledore's expression. Not shame, exactly. Something more complicated, and something that was trying not to become shame by dressing itself up as necessity. Your parents knew there was a prophecy, Dumbledore said. They knew Voldemort had been told of it. They went into hiding. Did they know the full text? Harry said. A pause. Did they know, Harry said, more specifically, the part about either must die at the hand of the other? Dumbledore's hands, resting on his knees, pressed flat. No, he said. Hermione stopped writing. The twins, who had been very still in their chairs, exchanged one of their wordless looks. You hid the most important part of the prophecy from the people it was killing, Harry said. He said it without rage. With something colder and more precise than rage. My parents died running from a threat you'd known the true shape of for a year and had chosen to manage rather than fully disclose. I was trying to protect, you were trying to control, Harry said. There's a real difference and I think you know it. Protecting someone means giving them what they need to make their own choices. Controlling them means making the choices for them and calling it protection. He looked at the fire. My parents might have made different choices if they'd known the full text. They might have found a different path. They might have, he stopped himself. Because that road went somewhere he wasn't ready to walk all the way down yet, not tonight, not here, and he knew it. He filed it away instead, the way he'd learned to file things too large to carry immediately, to be dealt with when there was space. The blocks, he said, coming back to the present. 38 specific blocks. Helena Ravenclaw told me each one targets a specific type of magical output. You knew, when I was 3 days old, what 38 types of magical expression I had that needed containing. I knew what the prophecy suggested your power would be, Dumbledore said. I extrapolated. How accurate was your extrapolation? Dumbledore looked at his hands. Very, he said, quietly. Then you knew, Harry said, for 10 years, that I was capable of what I am now. And you kept it from me and from everyone else. If Voldemort had known, Voldemort was gone, Harry said. He didn't have a body. He was barely a presence. The blocks weren't for Voldemort's benefit. They were for yours. He looked at Dumbledore steadily. They kept me manageable. Small enough to be placed and positioned and prepared for the role you'd assigned me. If I'd had access to my full power at 5 years old, you'd have lost control of the whole arrangement. Dumbledore said nothing. And the silence was the loudest kind of confirmation. The tethering, Harry said. Helena said the blocks may have had a secondary function. Connective. Tied to Voldemort's magical structure. Here's something happened that Harry hadn't expected. Dumbledore closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them there was something that hadn't been there before, not guilt, which Harry had seen, but grief. Genuine grief, with real depth to it, the kind you can't manufacture. Yes, Dumbledore said, and his voice had changed. That is the part one have found hardest to, he stopped. And then, with what appeared to be actual difficulty, when Voldemort's curse rebounded on him at Godric's Hollow, it didn't entirely destroy him. It did something else. Something I've suspected since that night and confirmed through subsequent research. He looked at Harry. There is a fragment of Voldemort's soul attached to you. To your scar. It happened in the moment of the curse's rebound, a piece of his soul was displaced and anchored to the only living thing in the room. The fire. The crackling. Hermione's sharp intake of breath. Fred stood up. Then sat back down. Then looked at George, who was staring at Dumbledore with the specific expression of someone whose understanding of the situation had just dramatically expanded. Harry looked at his own hands. At the thin scar on his forehead, which he'd been told his whole life was a remnant of the car crash that killed his parents, the lie so ordinary and domestic and completely wrong. A soul fragment, he said. Yes. In me. In the scar. Not in you, not part of you. Attached to you. The distinction is important, Harry said. But also terrible. Yes. And the blocks, Harry said, and now he could see it fully, the complete architecture, the 60-year design in its entirety, and it was worse than he'd thought, not because it was malicious but because it was coherent. It made sense. That was what made it monstrous. The blocks were partly meant to contain that fragment as well. To keep it dormant. To keep it from, what? From influencing you, Dumbledore said. And from alerting Voldemort to the full scope of what he had inadvertently created. If the fragment was dormant, if you were, suppressed, contained, then the connection between you and whatever remained of him would be passive. Non-operational. But if I had access to my full power, Harry said. The connection would be active. Potentially, yes. And Fawkes burned the blocks away, which means, the connection is now live, Dumbledore said. Which is why Voldemort has been, I've had indications in the last 2 days that his activity has increased. That whatever vessel he's currently using is, Quirrell, Harry said. Dumbledore went still. Not shocked still, the kind of still that means you've been caught knowing something you were holding back. You know about Quirrell, Harry said. I have suspicions, Dumbledore said. Which I was managing carefully. You were using Quirrell, Harry said. As bait. Or a funnel. You put the stone in the 3rd floor specifically because Voldemort would try to get to it through whatever vessel he had, and you designed the defenses so that the vessel would get through most of them and then, encounter something the vessel couldn't overcome, Dumbledore said, and the gentleness of his voice did not disguise what he was describing. Me, Harry said. Silence. You put the stone in this castle, Harry said, and you put me in this castle, and you designed a sequence that would funnel Voldemort toward the stone and me toward both of them. Without telling me. Without preparing me. At what point were you going to tell me what I was walking into? When you were ready. You don't know when I'm ready, Harry said, and there was an edge in it now, not rage but something cleaner and sharper. You've been making that decision for me since I was 3 days old and you have been wrong about it every single time. I was ready at age 1. My magic was ready. I was the one with the power to survive what killed my parents. And you spent 10 years making me small because you needed me positioned correctly for a narrative you'd written without me. Dumbledore looked at him. And Harry looked back. And the fire burned. I know, Dumbledore said. 3 words. No curation, no framing, no gentleness deployed as management. Just 3 words with the weight of everything behind them. I know, he said again. I have known, for some time, that the choices I made, the choices I continue to justify to myself as necessary, have caused you harm that cannot be undone. The years with the Dursleys. The blocks. The way you came to this school not knowing who you were or what you were capable of. The soul fragment in your scar. The path I had laid for you that ended in, he stopped. In my death, Harry said. The word sat in the room like a stone dropped in water, and the ripples went outward in the silence, and nobody spoke for a long moment. The prophecy, Harry said. Either must die at the hand of the other. You thought, you believed, that in the end, would have to, die, Dumbledore said, and he said it plainly, with none of the diplomatic softening available to him. To destroy the soul fragment within you, I believed you would need to allow Voldemort to kill you. That the fragment would then be destroyed and he would be vulnerable. And then someone else would have to finish it, Harry said. Someone would have to kill Voldemort while I was, he stopped. You were going to let me walk into that. Knowing. Without telling me. Yes, Dumbledore said. In the corner, Fred had his hand over his mouth. George had stood up and walked to the window and was standing with his back to the room, shoulders rigid, looking out at the dark grounds. Hermione's quill had been still for several minutes. Harry looked at the fire for a long time. He let himself feel it, the full weight of what had been planned for him, the scope of it, the years of careful arrangement all aimed at a destination he'd never been told about. He let it land completely, because the alternative was carrying it without acknowledging it, and he'd done enough of that, had done 10 years of carrying things without acknowledging them, and he was done with that particular skill. He felt it. And then he put it in the same place he'd put the road he hadn't walked down yet, the what could have been road, and he turned back to Dumbledore. Is it certain, he said, that the soul fragment can only be destroyed that way? Dumbledore looked at him, and something moved in his expression. Surprise, Harry thought. The specific surprise of someone who expected a different response and was recalibrating. No, Dumbledore said, slowly. It is not certain. It was the conclusion I reached through a very particular framework of analysis, but you started from a conclusion and built the analysis backward, Harry said. The conclusion being that sacrifice was the only option, because sacrifice fit the shape of the prophecy as you'd interpreted it. And the interpretation was convenient for the 60-year plan. Dumbledore was quiet. There are other ways to extract a soul fragment, Hermione said, from her corner. Her voice was very controlled. I read about it in a dark magic theory text last year. Briefly. Before they took the book away. It's dangerous and it's difficult and it requires a very specific type of magical intervention, but it is documented as possible. Dumbledore looked at her. I'm Hermione Granger, she said, in the tone of someone who considers this sufficient introduction. I read everything. I'm aware of who you are, Miss Granger, Dumbledore said, and there was, despite everything, a quality to his voice that was almost warm. Your point is valid. The extraction method exists. It requires a phoenix, Harry said. Dumbledore went still again. The different kind this time. Harry looked at the empty perch. Fawkes burned away 38 blocks in the great hall that were anchored in my core. If a phoenix's fire can burn away deliberate magical constructs attached to a living person's magic without harming the person, the soul fragment is considerably more complex than a binding, more complex, yes. But same principle. Fawkes came to me specifically. He burned what needed burning. He knew what the blocks were and what they were connected to, Helena said so. Harry looked at Dumbledore. He's not your phoenix because you own him. He's your phoenix because he chose to be. And he unchose it when it came to this. Dumbledore looked at the empty perch for a long, long moment. And then he said something that Harry hadn't expected from him at all, something that had none of the management and none of the calculation. He said it in the voice of the man behind the roll, the one who'd been carrying something for 60 years and had just been shown there might be somewhere to put it down. I have been so certain, Dumbledore said, for so long, that I could see the full picture. That my sight was wider than anyone else's and that this width justified the choices. I have built everything on the premise that I was right. Not good, not kind, those I've sometimes questioned. But right. Correct. Seeing what others couldn't see and acting on it when others wouldn't. He looked at Harry. And you are 11 years old and you walked in here tonight and in the space of 20 minutes you have identified 3 assumptions in my 60-year plan that I built as certainties and are actually choices, Harry said. Dressed up as certainties. Yes, Dumbledore said. Very quietly. Yes. The fire burned. Tomorrow, Harry said. The inquiry is Thursday but I want the full board notified tomorrow. Not just the 2 staff members. The full board, the ministry liaison, and an independent magical core examiner to document what was done to my core and what traces remain. Can you ensure that happens, or do I need to do it myself? I'll send the notifications tonight, Dumbledore said. Harry looked at him. You're not fighting this. No, Dumbledore said. You could, Harry said. You have the authority, you have the connections, you could bury the inquiry in procedural challenges for months. Yes, Dumbledore said. I could. Why aren't you? Dumbledore looked at him for a moment. Because I have known, for 2 days, since the moment Fawkes made his choice in the Great Hall, that the version of events I've been protecting is over. That what I did can be defended but cannot be justified. There is a difference. He paused. And because you deserve, at minimum, honesty. Everything else I owe you is considerably larger and considerably harder to give. But honesty I can give tonight. Harry nodded. He stood up. The others stood with him, Fred coming back from the window, George turning around, Hermione closing her notebook. They moved toward the door in the quiet way of people who have heard something large enough to need distance to process. Harry stopped at the door. The plan you had, he said, without turning around. The one where I died. Did you grieve it? When you built it? Was it hard? The pause behind him lasted long enough to mean something. Every day, Dumbledore said. Every single day. Harry stood there for a moment. Something moved through him, not forgiveness, not yet, maybe not for a long time, but something that was the precursor to it. The recognition of a person's genuine grief as distinct from their genuine wrong. The two things could exist at the same time. He'd learned that in the cupboard, too. Good, he said, and he meant it. He walked out. In the corridor outside, the four of them stood in the dark without speaking for a moment that was long enough to be its own kind of breathing room. The castle was quiet around them, past 10, most students asleep or pretending to be, the torches low. Fred broke it first. He was really going to let you, yes, Harry said. And he thought it was justified because, he thought it was necessary, Harry said. Not the same as justified, in his mind. He knew it was wrong. He did it anyway because he decided right and wrong were subordinate to necessary. He started walking toward Gryffindor Tower. Which is the most dangerous kind of person? Not someone who doesn't know the difference between right and wrong. Someone who does know and who has decided they have the authority to override it. George walked beside him. You're not angry. I'm angry, Harry said. I'm just not only angry. There's a lot of things at once. He looked at the dark corridor walls. He loved my parents. I believe that. He's been carrying their deaths since 1981. And he turned that grief into a 60-year machine and put me inside it and called it protection, and he was wrong, but the grief was real. He paused. People can be genuinely grieving and genuinely wrong at the same time. Understanding both doesn't mean excusing either. Hermione was looking at him in the particular way she'd started looking at him since yesterday morning, trying to work out, Harry suspected, whether she was witnessing something extraordinary or had simply been underestimating what 11-year-olds were capable of. He thought it was probably both. Thursday, she said. The inquiry. How do you want to handle it? I want the full text of the prophecy in the record, Harry said. I want the documentation of the blocks, the dates, the specific types. Flitwick can analyze what burned away. I want testimony from Helena, from the hat, from you and the twins. I want Snape on record about the prophecy being passed to Voldemort and Dumbledore's subsequent decision-making. And I want the soul fragment on the record because the board needs to know that Voldemort isn't gone, that there's an active vessel in this castle right now, and that the current headmaster's plan for dealing with it was to use me as the mechanism. Hermione was writing in the dark, by the faint light of her wand. I'll draft the formal statement tonight. You'll need to review it before morning. Leave it on my bedside table, Harry said. I'll be up early. You're always up early, she said. Old habit, he said. They reached the fat lady's portrait, said the password, and climbed through. The common room was empty except for a third year who was asleep with their Transfiguration textbook open on their chest, and the fire was banked low, and the room had that late-night warmth that common rooms get when everyone's gone to bed and the fire's been left to burn down on its own. Harry sat in one of the chairs by the fire and didn't immediately go up to the dorm. The others filed past, Fred squeezing his shoulder once briefly without making anything of it, George doing the same, Hermione pausing. "Are you all right?" she asked. The third time someone had asked him that today. "Getting better at knowing how to answer that," he said. She almost smiled. It was the same almost smile she'd had at breakfast. He thought that when it became a full one it would be worth seeing. "I'll have the statement ready by 5. "I'll be up by 4, he said. She made a small incredulous sound and went upstairs. He sat by the fire alone. The light was amber and low and not that different from Dumbledore's office light. Now he thought about it, and he spent a moment thinking about that, about how much of the conversation had happened in firelight, both literally and metaphorically. About how fire was the right medium for it. Truth by firelight. You couldn't hide as much in it. Fawkes appeared without announcement or entry, simply present suddenly on the arm of the chair beside him, warm and quiet and real. "You were waiting to see how it went," Harry said. Frill. Affirmative. "He's going to cooperate with the inquiry," Harry said. "He's not going to fight it. He stopped. I think he's relieved. Which is strange. But I think 60 years of certainty is exhausting when you're also carrying grief that size. I think some part of him has wanted to put it down for a while." Fawkes pressed against his arm. "Warm. The soul fragment," Harry said, quietly. "In the scar. You knew." Fawkes was still. "Can you burn it?" Harry said. "Like the blocks. Can you, without hurting me? Can you get it out?" Fawkes turned and looked at him with those amber eyes that were the color of something very old and very knowing. And for a long moment he simply looked. Then he made a sound, not a trill, not the conversational low note. Something else entirely. Something Harry's chest responded to in the way music can move something in you before your brain has processed what you've heard. It meant, not yet. But yes. Soon. Harry asked. "When it's time." "How will I know when it's time?" The Phoenix put his head against Harry's hand, and Harry felt the warmth of him go from his fingers through his palm and up his arm and into his chest, and the soul fragment, which he'd never consciously felt before because the blocks had muffled it, but which he could feel now, a cold specific shadow at the back of his consciousness like a room in a house that's always locked, shivered. Just once. And then was quiet. "You'll know," Fawkes said, without words. Harry sat by the dying fire until past midnight, and Fawkes sat with him, and the castle breathed around them, and somewhere in the third-floor corridor something ancient and golden sat behind iron doors and waited, and somewhere in a room on the 7th floor a man who wasn't quite a man stood very still in the dark, and somewhere in an office full of spinning instruments an old man who had built 60 years of planning on the bedrock of his own certainty began, very slowly, to consider what he might build instead. Thursday came in grey and still, the way serious days sometimes do, as if the weather understands tone. The Board of Governors convened in the largest meeting room the castle had, normally used for exams, cleared overnight by house elves who, Hermione had noted with an expression of profound ethical discomfort, deserved better working conditions and a conversation for another time. 8 governors in their formal robes, 3 ministry observers including a junior Wisengamot liaison named Persephone Thorne who had the organized energy of someone who'd reviewed the case file twice before breakfast. Professor Flitwick and Professor McGonagall at the formally designated staff table. An independent magical corps examiner named Alaric Voss who smelled of old parchment and had the eyes of someone who'd seen a great deal of magical damage in his career. And Dumbledore. Sitting not at the head table, he had offered to sit as subject rather than presiding officer, and Flitwick had accepted this with quiet gravity, but at a chair at the main floor, facing the board. Harry sat to the left with his witnesses. Hermione, in the chair beside him with 4 inches of written documentation on the table in front of her. Neville, who had received a letter from his grandmother the previous evening that had made his hands shake and his jaw set in a way Harry recognized as someone deciding what to do with information they'd waited their whole life to receive. The twins. Snape, at the far end, separate from Harry's group but distinctly not at the staff table. Helena Ravenclaw, present as a witness in the formal sense, drifting at the room's edge. The Sorting Hat sat on its stool in the corner. Nobody had asked it to come. It had turned up anyway. Persephone Thorne opened proceedings with the precise efficiency of someone who convened more difficult inquiries than this and was not intimidated by any of the parties. This inquiry is called under Statute 12 of the Hogwarts Educational Governance Act, specifically the provisions governing harm to students arising from staff conduct, she said. Formal record begins now. Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore, Headmaster of Hogwarts School. The primary allegation before this inquiry is the unauthorized magical modification of a student's core through the placement of 38 individual binding constructs without medical necessity, Wisengamot approval, or consent. Do you contest this allegation? Dumbledore said, no. The room, which had been anticipating a contest, adjusted itself. Alaric Voss presented his examination findings first. He'd been given an hour with Harry that morning, and his report was thorough and damning and put in technical language that Hermione subsequently translated for the record in plain terms. 38 constructs, each one identified, dated to within a week of November 1, 1981, magical signature consistent across all blocks and matching Dumbledore's documented spellwork from Ministry records. Secondary function, connective tethering, confirmed on 4 of the blocks. Estimated effect on the subject's development, significant. Significant, Persephone said. Quantify that. Voss looked at Harry, who nodded. The subject's magical core, currently unblocked, tests at approximately 4 times the average output for an 11-year-old wizard, Voss said. The specific abilities suppressed include, but are not limited to, intention magic, empathic magical projection, instinctive warding, long-range magical perception, and what I would classify as a rare and extremely unusual capacity for truth compulsion without a formal spell. He paused. In my 32 years of practice, I have never examined a core of this breadth and strength in someone this age. The closest analogues in the historical literature are the Founders. Hermione put her hand on the table and looked at it and didn't look at Harry, because looking at him right now felt like it might tip something in her over. The blocking of these capacities, Voss continued, from infancy through to the subject's arrival at Hogwarts, represents not only the loss of magical development but the loss of self-awareness and self-determination that magical capacity and self develop in tandem. In my professional opinion, this constitutes significant and long-term harm. The governors looked at Dumbledore. Dumbledore looked at his hands. Persephone moved efficiently through the documentation. McGonagall testified about the morning conversation and the word suboptimal. The Sorting Hat gave evidence from its stool in the corner in the measured tones of something that has been a legal witness before and has no difficulty with the format. Helena Ravenclaw drifted forward and spoke with the precision of 5 centuries of observation. Snape, when his turn came, sat perfectly straight in his chair and spoke to the record in a voice from which everything personal had been carefully excised, and said, clearly and without qualification, that he had been the source of the information that had led Voldemort to target the Potters, that Dumbledore had known this and had used it to ensure Snape's loyalty and involvement, and that Dumbledore's management of the prophecy from inception had constituted a sustained manipulation of all parties it touched. He did not look at Dumbledore when he said it. He did not look at Harry either. He looked at the record, and he spoke to it, and that was enough. When Harry was asked to speak, he stood. He'd reviewed Hermione's draft at 4:15 in the morning, made 3 small changes, and memorized the shape of what he wanted to say. He didn't use notes. He spoke for 11 minutes. He described his life at the Dursleys without embellishment and without drama, in the flat tone of facts that were damning enough on their own without decoration. He described the accidental magic that had gotten him locked in the cupboard, punished, isolated, magic that was a direct consequence of his blocked core having nowhere to go except outward in uncontrolled bursts. He described coming to Hogwarts without knowing what he was or what he was capable of, shaped entirely by suppression and absence. And then he described the night in the Great Hall, and Fawkes, and what it felt like when 38 blocks burned away simultaneously. Like being born, he said. The actual version. The one where you don't go back. He sat down. The room was very quiet. Persephone looked at Dumbledore. The floor is yours, she said. Dumbledore stood. He was, even now, a presence. Even stripped of his authority and his framing, there was something real and undeniable in him that wasn't about power or position, just the quality of someone who had genuinely committed to their own convictions for 60 years. That kind of commitment leaves a mark. It showed in the way he stood, in the steadiness of his voice when he spoke. I won't defend what I cannot, he said. I placed those blocks. I maintained them. I placed Harry with the Dursleys knowing what they were and chose not to look further when reports suggested the situation was, he stopped himself using the word again. Harmful. I did all of it in service of a plan I built on a prophecy I interpreted through the lens of my own grief and my own certainty, and I never, not once, allowed the possibility that I was wrong to fully register. He looked at the board. Not because I didn't know the possibility existed. Because I knew that if I considered it fully, the entire architecture I'd built would need to be dismantled and rebuilt, and I did not have the courage for that. He looked at Harry then, directly. The prophecy, he said, does not dictate outcomes. It describes possibilities. I chose to read it as a fixed road and I built a person's life around that reading, and the person it was built around is 11 years old and has spent this week, in between arriving at a school he should have been excited about, dismantling 60 years of my planning with the clarity I should have had 60 years ago. He paused. I am sorry. I understand that is insufficient. I understand it covers nothing of what was taken. But it is true, and it is the minimum you're owed. Harry looked at him. A long look. And then he nodded, once, small, just an acknowledgement. Not forgiveness. Not absolution. Just, I heard you. Persephone called a brief recess and reconvened at lunch. The board deliberated for 40 minutes. Their findings were read at 1:30. Dumbledore was suspended from his role as headmaster pending a full Wisengamot review of the statutory violations. The stone in the third-floor corridor was to be removed immediately and returned to Nicholas Flamel. Ministry Aurors were to be notified regarding the presence of a potentially Voldemort-influenced individual on staff, that individual being Professor Quirrell, whose employment file would be reviewed and whose current location was to be monitored. An independent advocate was to be appointed for Harry Potter to oversee his interests and represent him in any subsequent proceedings. McGonagall was appointed acting headmistress. The board member who read this final decision looked at her when he said it. She received it with the stillness of someone who'd known, since 7:15 that morning, that this moment was coming, and had used the intervening days to decide how she felt about it. She accepted it with a nod, and the nod had everything in it, the grief, the responsibility, the 38 years of trust she was now the steward of rather than the recipient of. After the formal proceedings closed and the governors began their paperwork, Harry walked past Dumbledore on his way out. Dumbledore stood with the quality of someone who just put down something very heavy and couldn't quite find his normal posture without it. The soul fragment, Harry said, stopping. I need it gone before Quirrell makes his move. Fawkes is going to help with that. Dumbledore looked at him. That is, the extraction method is uncharted. The risks are mine to assess, Harry said. Not yours. He said it without cruelty, but without any opening either. You don't get to make the risk assessment for me anymore. Dumbledore was quiet. Then, no. I don't. But I'd like to know everything you know about the fragment, Harry said. All your research. All your documentation. I want it. Not because I'll do exactly what you would have done with it. Because it's information about me, and I have the right to it. I'll have it sent to your dormitory tonight, Dumbledore said. Harry nodded. And because he was who he was, not despite the 10 years in the cupboard but in some ways because of them, because small spaces teach you to see what's actually present rather than what's supposed to be there, he looked at the old man for a moment and said, "One more thing, you should rest," he said. "Properly. Whatever comes next, you can't do it on 60 years of sleeplessness." And then he walked out, into the grey still day, and Fawkes was waiting on the corridor windowsill outside, gleaming in the flat light like something that didn't need sun to burn. Chapter 5, The Architecture of Power. The stone was gone by Friday morning. 2 ministry officials arrived Thursday night with a sealed transport case and spent 40 minutes in the third-floor corridor while McGonagall stood watch and the rest of the castle slept, or tried to. Harry didn't sleep. He lay in his bed with Dumbledore's research notes spread across his covers, 7 inches of tightly written parchment, 3 separate notebooks, and a sealed folder labeled Fragment Analysis, Subject HP, compiled 1982 to 1991, and read everything. He read it the way you read something you know is going to change you. Carefully. Without rushing. With the lights up and his back against the headboard and Fawkes warming the foot of the bed like a heating charm with opinions. The soul fragment had a name in the literature, he discovered. Horcrux. Hermione had been right in Flitwick's office, Dumbledore's notes confirmed it. The word appeared on the 3rd page of the first notebook with a quality of reluctance to it, as if even writing it had cost something. The notes that followed were meticulous and thorough and shot through with the specific texture of someone who'd spent a decade trying to find an alternative conclusion and had kept arriving at the same terrible one. Until now. Because Dumbledore had not, Harry realized, reading carefully, ever considered the Phoenix method. He'd documented Fawkes's capabilities extensively, healing tears, regenerative fire, emotional attunement, but he'd never applied them to this problem. Whether that was an oversight or whether some part of him had simply never allowed the possibility that didn't end in Harry's death, Harry couldn't say for certain. Both felt plausible. Both felt, in different ways, like the same thing. He finished reading at 3 in the morning. He set the notes aside and looked at Fawkes. "You can do it," he said. "Not a question." Fawkes opened one eye. "Not tonight," Harry said. "But before Quirrell moves. Before whatever he's planning, because he's planning something, I can feel it. The connection to the fragment is, louder than it was yesterday. Like something's pushing on it from the other side." Fawkes made a low sound that confirmed this. "Tomorrow night?" Harry said. Fawkes considered this in the way of a creature for whom consideration was not hesitation but genuine assessment. Then, one clear trill. "Yes." Harry lay down, pulled his covers up over the research notes, and stared at the ceiling of his 4-poster in the dark. He thought about Quirrell standing motionless in the 7th-floor room on the map. He thought about the stone being removed tonight and what that would do to Quirrell's timeline, to whatever remained of Voldemort using Quirrell's body as a temporary home. He thought about the soul fragment in his scar, cold and specific, which he was now aware of the way you become aware of a sound you've been tuning out once someone points it out. He thought about what it meant that Voldemort had put a piece of his soul in a baby by accident and that piece had been sitting in Harry's head for 10 years, quiet and cold, while 38 blocks kept it dormant. He thought about whether that piece could feel things. Whether it had been aware. Whether it had known, in whatever diminished way a displaced soul fragment could know, what was happening around it. The thought was unpleasant enough that he filed it away and stopped thinking it. He fell asleep at 3:10. He woke at 6 when Ron Weasley sat up suddenly in the next bed and said, "Spider." With great alarm and then went immediately back to sleep, apparently satisfied. Harry lay there for 10 minutes in the gentle ambient sound of 4 other boys breathing, in a room that was his, in a school that was his, with magic he could feel humming quietly in his chest like a live current, and felt something he was only just developing the language for. Safe. Close enough to safe that the gap was acceptable. He got up, dressed, and went to find Hermione. She was already in the library. Of course she was. She'd been there since 5:30, apparently. She had a cup of tea she'd brought from the kitchen, which meant she'd already found the entrance behind the pear portrait, which meant she'd read about it somewhere, which was exactly Hermione to the bone. She had her notes spread across 2/3 of a table and was writing in the focused silence of someone in their natural habitat. She looked up when he sat down. "You read the files?" "All of it." "The Horcrux research?" "Yes." She set her quill down. "There are 7, she said. In the notes." He'd identified 6 others, objects he believed Voldemort had used. The diary, which he thinks was used during the last war. A ring. A locket. A cup. Something at Hogwarts, possibly a diadem. Something unknown. She paused. "And you?" "I know," Harry said. "I'm the one he didn't make on purpose." "Which technically means you're not a Horcrux in the—" She stopped herself. "Sorry. That's not the point right now." "It is, actually," Harry said. "It matters whether it was intentional or accidental because it changes what it is magically. A deliberate Horcrux requires a specific ritual. What I am is a residual. A splash. A fragment that needed somewhere to land and landed on me." He looked at his hand. "Fawkes is going to burn it out tomorrow night." Hermione was quiet. "You think that's too fast," Harry said. "I think it's undocumented," she said, carefully. "I think the Phoenix method of soul fragment removal has never been formally attempted on a living subject. I think the risks are real," Harry said. "I know. I've thought about it." He looked at her. "But here's what I also know. Voldemort is in this castle right now. In Quirrell. The stone was removed last night, which means his plan for getting a body back just collapsed, and cornered is exactly when someone like him is most dangerous. And he has a connection to me through that fragment that gets louder every day the blocks are gone." He held her gaze. "I don't want him in my head when he decides to act. Even if removing it is risky. The alternative is carrying someone else's soul piece while the person it belongs to is trying to come back to life 20 meters away." Hermione looked at him for a long moment. "I want to be there," she said. "When Fawkes does it. I want to document it." "Obviously," Harry said. She exhaled. "All right. Yes. Tomorrow night." She picked up her quill. "In the meantime, Quirrell. He doesn't know the stone is gone yet. The removal was ministry sealed and quiet. He'll find out today or tomorrow when he goes to check, which means we have a window." "What are you thinking?" Harry said. "I'm thinking that an active vessel of Voldemort in this school is a security problem that the Ministry Auror should be handling, except that the official Auror notification was filed yesterday and will take 3 to 5 business days to result in anyone actually arriving, because bureaucracy doesn't care about urgency." She was writing again, in the rapid-fire style of someone keeping pace with her own thoughts. "Which means there's a period, roughly the next 48 hours, where Quirrell is aware that Dumbledore's authority is compromised, the stone is here but potentially about to be removed or already removed, and whatever plan he had is in jeopardy. That's when he'll move," Harry said. "Not in 3 days when the Aurors arrive. Now. In the window." "Yes," Hermione said. "So the question is whether we wait for him to move and respond, or, we don't wait," Harry said. Hermione looked up. "Waiting is what Dumbledore's plan required," Harry said. "Everything about his setup was designed for a reactive sequence. Voldemort tries to get the stone, works through the defenses, reaches the end, and Harry conveniently appears. I'm not interested in being the convenient appearance. If Quirrell is going to move in the next 48 hours, I want to move first." Hermione was absolutely still for 2 seconds. Then, define move first. "Not confrontation," Harry said. "Not yet. But I want to know exactly where he is and what his state is. I want the twins' map on him from now until the Aurors arrive. And I want," he stopped, thinking. I want to talk to him. You want to? Hermione set her quill down very carefully. Harry. Not to quarrel, Harry said. To whatever's using him. I wanted to know that the stone is gone. That the path Dumbledore built for Voldemort, the one that ends with me walking into a confrontation unprepared, is gone. I wanted to know it's dealing with something it hasn't accounted for. Hermione looked at him with the expression she reserved for moments when Harry said something that was simultaneously reasonable and alarming. She'd been cataloguing these moments since Tuesday morning. The list was growing. You want to walk up to a professor who's being possessed by Voldemort, she said, and tell him the plan's changed. Yes. And you think that's safer than waiting? I think it's more honest, Harry said. And I think surprise is only useful if the other party assumes you'll behave normally. Voldemort is expecting me to behave like the child Dumbledore shaped. I'm not that child. Hermione pressed her lips together. Then she wrote something. Then she said, "You're taking the twins." Obviously, Harry said. And me. Obviously, Harry said again. She nodded once, with the decisiveness of someone who'd made peace with a decision by making sure it had sufficient documentation. Fine. But not today. Today I want more information about Quirrell's current state. The map, records from other students who've been in his classes. I've been asking around and apparently his defense teaching has been notably terrible, which could be deliberate concealment of ability or could be evidence of the possession affecting his cognitive function. She paused. Also he smells terrible, and 3 Hufflepuff second years independently told me the smell gets worse when he's near Harry specifically, which is, evidence of the fragment, Harry said. The cold presence I feel near him. He can feel the fragment from his side. Right. She made a note. So mutual awareness. Which means he knows I know something, Harry said. Or suspects it. They looked at each other. Today is for gathering, Harry said. Tomorrow is for acting. Hermione nodded. I'll have a full profile by tonight. Harry stood, stretched, and looked out the high library windows at the morning grounds, gray-green in the early light, the black lake flat and dark. He thought about Quirrell somewhere in the castle with something cold and ancient riding the back of his skull, and he thought about the soul fragment in his own scar responding to it like 2 tuning forks at opposite ends of a room, and he felt the shape of the next 24 hours the way you feel weather coming, not dread exactly, but the specific readiness of knowing something's on its way and choosing to stand in the open rather than take cover. The twins found him after breakfast. Not together, George first, in the corridor outside the Great Hall, with the map unfolded and an expression that had crossed from their usual comfortable irony into something more alert. Quirrell's been in the 3rd floor corridor, George said, low and quick. 40 minutes. He's just come out. He's in his office now and the map shows, he paused. I've been watching it since 6. His dot. It's been wrong all week. The way it moves. Wrong how? Harry said. George looked at the map. It moves like there's a weight on one side. Like the dot can't quite decide where it is. Regular people, he showed Harry another dot, a Ravenclaw 4th year moving through the East Wing. They move continuously. Quirrell's dot, he pointed. It jumps. Short, very fast jumps, every few minutes. Like something's taking over the movement for a moment and then releasing it. Harry looked at the dot labeled Quirinus Quirrell sitting in the defense office on the 3rd floor. He knows the stone is gone, Harry said. Yeah, George said. I think he does. Fred came from the direction of the stairs at pace, slightly out of breath, which for Fred Weasley meant something had happened quickly. Staff meeting in McGonagall's office, he said. Just started. Flitwick, Sprout, McGonagall, Snape. Not Quirrell. He paused meaningfully. McGonagall's called it without him. Harry looked at Quirrell's dot. She knows, he said. She was told yesterday, Fred said. After the inquiry. Ministry liaison told her about the aura notification and suggested she treat the situation as live. She's keeping him in place, Harry said. Running the castle normally around him so he doesn't bolt before the auras arrive. He thought for a moment. Which means she's not going to confront him, and the auras aren't here yet, and the stone is gone, but he doesn't know if it left the building or just moved. He might still think it's somewhere he can reach. You want to act today, George said, reading his face. I said tomorrow, Harry said. But if he's already checked the corridor, the timeline compressed, George finished. They found Hermione in the library, informed her of the update, and watched her compress her own timeline with the particular efficiency of someone who's very good at being wrong gracefully and recalibrating fast. Fine, she said. Today. But not alone. And not without Snape knowing. Snape? Fred said. He's in the staff meeting, Hermione said. He knows about Quirrell. He's been watching him. I'd bet he would have been Dumbledore's monitor, the one keeping an eye on staff anomalies. If Quirrell makes a move, Snape needs to be positioned to do what, exactly? George said. To be a second adult in the situation, Hermione said, in the tone of someone who considered adult supervision non-negotiable regardless of the circumstances. Harry looked at her. I'm serious, she said. I know, he said. Send him a note. She wrote it in 60 seconds. The house owl they sent came back in 4 minutes with a reply in Snape's handwriting, 3rd floor. Noon. Don't be seen. It was the most efficient communication Harry had experienced with a professor so far. At noon, the 3rd floor corridor had the quality it always had, slightly removed from the rest of the castle's traffic, the kind of space that students' instincts naturally routed them around. Snape was already there when they arrived, standing in the shadows near the defense classroom with his arms folded and his expression in its sealed professional setting. He looked at the 4 of them, Harry, Hermione, Fred, George, with the specific look of someone who has agreed to be involved in something and is now seeing the full reality of what that means. For children, he said. One of whom is not normal, Fred said, helpfully. Snape looked at Harry. What's your intention? Quirrell knows the stone is gone, Harry said. He's going to move today. Either he tries to find it elsewhere in the castle or he tries something else. He met Snape's eyes. You know more about what Voldemort needs and what Quirrell's capable of than anyone else in this building right now. Snape's jaw moved. He needs a body, he said, flatly. Whatever form he's currently taking, spirit, possessor, it's not stable. It degrades. Quirrell's body is compromised. You'll have noticed the turban. Voldemort is sustained on the back of Quirrell's skull. The longer this continues, the more of Quirrell he consumes. So Quirrell is dying, Harry said. Has been dying, Snape said. Since at least the summer. Then taking the stone away didn't just remove his path to a body, Harry said slowly. It pushed a timeline that was already critical. He'll be desperate, Hermione said. Which means unpredictable. Voldemort is never unpredictable, Snape said. He is extremely intelligent and extremely ruthless, and those qualities do not diminish with desperation. They focus. He looked at Harry. He will not try something random. He will try the only remaining option that can get him what he needs. The corridor was quiet. Me, Harry said. Snape's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes did. You. He doesn't need the stone if he has me, Harry said. The soul fragment. If he can, what? Repossess it? Reclaim it? If he can extract the fragment from me and use it as an anchor to take a new body, that is not how it works, Snape said. Precisely. But it is analogous enough to be the logic he'd use. He paused. He has always known the fragment was there. He felt its creation. He felt it activate when the blocks fell. His voice had the careful precision of someone navigating a field they know is mined. He will want proximity to it. To you. Before any extraction or physical approach can happen, he needs contact, Harry said. Snape looked at him steadily. Yes. Which means coming to me, Harry said. Rather than me going to him. Unless he can engineer a situation where you come to him. Harry thought about this. About what would make an 11-year-old boy walk toward rather than away from a possessed professor in a third-floor corridor. A friend, Harry said. He'd use a friend. Someone I'd go into danger for. Everyone looked at everyone else. Neville, Harry said, and the certainty of it was cold. He's been watching us all week. He knows who I've been talking to. Neville was a possible subject of the prophecy. He'd know that, Dumbledore knew it, it would be in whatever records Voldemort had from the war. He was already moving. Where's Neville right now? George had the map. He unfolded it fast, running his finger to the end section. Greenhouse 2. Herbology, he stopped. His finger moved. No. He was. He's not there anymore. He traced the dot. Third floor. The silence lasted half a second. Then they were moving. The corridor that led toward the other end of the third floor was not the one with the iron door. That end had been emptied when the stone was removed, its wards dissolved, the space now just a room. This was the corridor that ran parallel to it, narrower, older, used less. Harry turned the corner at speed and saw Quirrell first. He was standing in the center of the corridor. Neville was pressed against the wall 6 feet away with the specific rigid stillness of someone being held in place by a spell they hadn't seen coming, and his expression was trying very hard not to be afraid and not quite managing it. Quirrell looked at Harry and his face did the thing Harry had noticed at the feast, the fractional mismatch of expression and intent, the half-second lag of a man whose body was not entirely his own. Ah, Quirrell said. There you are. Harry walked forward without slowing. Behind him he heard Hermione's sharp intake and felt rather than saw Snape move to the side, taking a flanking position, present but not intervening, reading the situation with the tactical awareness of someone who'd fought in a war. The twins spread instinctively, one to each side of the corridor. Harry stopped 8 feet from Quirrell. Close enough to be a choice. Far enough to have options. Let him go, Harry said. Quirrell smiled, and it was not Quirrell's smile. He's perfectly comfortable. A temporary persuasion. His head tilted, and the motion had an extra quality to it, like something shifting inside the turban. You've grown considerably in a week, Mr. Potter. I felt it, you know. Tuesday night. Like a door opening. The blocks, Harry said. Your potential, the smile shifted into something with more edges. He felt it quite keenly. The connection between you. Quirrell's hand came up and touched his turban almost absently. We have been adjacent for 10 years and he has been waiting. Patiently. For this. The stone is gone, Harry said. Something moved across Quirrell's face. Not surprise, he'd known, they'd guessed right. But the words spoken plainly had an effect. The fractional mismatch increased. Two presences disagreeing. I know, Quirrell said. Disappointing. But not, his head tilted again. Not unsurmountable. Unsurmountable, Harry said. Right. Because you think there's still a path. There is always a path when one has, no, Harry said. And the word came out with a quality that wasn't volume but was something much better, wait. Certainty. The kind of certainty that doesn't perform itself because it doesn't need to. There isn't. The stone is gone. The plan Dumbledore built that put me in this castle as a convenient mechanism, that's done. I know about the soul fragment. I know what it is and I know how to remove it. He held Quirrell's gaze, which meant holding Voldemort's gaze through the medium of a dying man's eyes. Whatever's left of you in that man's skull is going back to wherever it came from, and you don't get to come back this time the way you did before. The silence in the corridor was absolute. Then Quirrell's body moved in a way Quirrell's body shouldn't have been able to move, too fast, wrong angles, the specific wrongness of something animating flesh it doesn't fully understand, and the spell it threw was not anything on the Hogwarts curriculum. It was old and it was dark and it was aimed at Harry's chest. Harry moved. Not a conscious decision. Not trained reflexes, he had no trained reflexes yet, barely a week of magic education. It was something older and more immediate. The intention Magic Voss had identified. His core reading the incoming spell the way you read a shout, before the content, just the intent, and responding to the intent before the content arrived. He went sideways and the spell took a divot out of the wall where he'd been standing, and the stone smoked. Snape moved from the side and cast something wordless and precise that hit Quirrell in the shoulder and staggered him, and Hermione, who had been preparing since the first sign of movement, cast a full body bind with the kind of accuracy that came from reading the incantation 4 times before she'd ever held a wand, and it caught Quirrell in the legs and he went down. Not unconscious. Not stopped. Just impeded. What came out of the back of Quirrell's head when he hit the stone floor was not describable in ordinary terms. It was not a ghost, not a spirit, not anything with a defined edge. It was a cold that was shaped like the absence of something rather than the presence of it, that had the quality of a wound rather than a thing, and it moved with the horrible purposeful wrongness of something that knows exactly what it wants. It moved toward Harry. Harry stood in its path and opened his palm and thought about fire. Not Fawkes's fire. His own. The magic that had been coiled in his chest since Tuesday morning, warm and self-organizing, patient with itself, that had turned the light on in the dark before dawn and moved it with a thought. He opened it the way you open a door, simply, without drama, and what came out was not flame in any ordinary sense, it was light, white gold, the specific color of something that has been kept too long in the dark and is finally being let out, and it hit the cold presence in the corridor like a wave hits a wall. The cold pressed back. For 3 seconds they stood there, the cold and the light, in the old stones of Hogwarts, the fragment in Harry's scar resonating with the cold presence in a way that made his scar burn, the first time it had ever burned, white and real and immediate, and Harry felt the soul fragment straining toward the external cold, felt it pulling, felt the specific horrible sensation of something in him trying to leave him. He closed his hand into a fist. The fragment stayed. The light pushed forward. The cold thing made a sound that wasn't exactly sound, it was felt rather than heard, in the cavity of the chest, the specific register of something being undone, and then it fragmented. Not destroyed. Not gone. But dispersed, scattered, reduced from a thing with direction to a thing without one. A cold presence without a vector. Voldemort, or what was currently left of him, scattered like smoke in a wind. Not dead. But not here. The corridor went very, very quiet. Quirrell was on the floor in the aftermath of the body bind with an expression that was, gradually and in stages, becoming entirely his own again, like a sky after a storm clearing. He looked up at Harry from the stone floor with eyes that were frightened and exhausted and almost entirely Quirrell again, and said, in a voice scraped of everything else, "Is he gone?" "For now," Harry said. Quirrell closed his eyes. Neville had slid down the wall from his held-in-place position, the persuasion spell dissolved when its caster hit the floor. He was sitting on the ground with his knees drawn up and his hands very steady, the steadiness of someone who's frightened but is not going to let it win, and he was looking at Harry with an expression that was processing several things simultaneously. Harry crouched in front of him. "Are you all right?" "You just," Neville pointed at the space where the cold thing had been. "Yes." "With your hand?" "Yes." "Without a wand?" "Yes." Neville looked at his own hands. Then at Harry. "I want to learn that," he said, in the voice of someone making a decision. "I'll teach you," Harry said. "Whatever I can." Neville nodded once, with the firmness of someone who's just decided something important and is done reconsidering it. Snape was crouching by Quirrell with 2 fingers on the man's pulse and his expression in the mode Harry was beginning to recognize as his most genuine, stripped of the performance, just sharp and present. He needs the hospital wing, Snape said. Now. The possession damage is, he looked up and met Harry's eyes. Significant. Harry stood. Fred. George. Get Madame Pomfrey. They were already gone. Hermione appeared at his shoulder. She was holding her notebook and her wand, and her expression had the particular quality of someone who had just done something very brave and was in the process of integrating that information about themselves. That wasn't what I documented, she said, gesturing at where the cold had been. No. You didn't just repel it. You broke its coherence. Yes. She looked at the space. That's not something 11-year-olds can do. I'm integrating faster, Harry said, using Helena's phrase. Hermione looked at him for a moment. Then she wrote something in her notebook, something brief, just a few words, and closed it. What did you write? Harry asked. That I need significantly more books, she said. Snape made a sound that, in a different person, might have been a laugh. It was too brief to identify conclusively. He looked at Harry over Quirrell's still form with the expression he'd had in the empty classroom Tuesday morning, the one that was doing a reassessment it didn't entirely want to do and couldn't stop. The fragment, Snape said. When the cold thing reached for it. You held it. Yes. By force. By choice, Harry corrected. There's a difference. Snape looked at him for a moment with something that was not approval, exactly, he didn't do approval in standard shapes, but was recognition of a very specific kind. The kind he reserved for things done correctly and precisely. Tonight, Harry said. The fragment comes out tonight. I don't want to hold it in place again. I want it gone. Snape nodded. Once. Like a door closing on an argument. McGonagall arrived with Fred and George and Madame Pomfrey 3 minutes later, and the corridor went from its ringing post-confrontation stillness to the efficient controlled busyness of people who knew what needed doing. Pomfrey had Quirrell levitated to the hospital wing in 4 minutes. McGonagall stood in the space where the cold presence had been and pressed one hand flat against the wall as if taking the castle's pulse. Then she looked at Harry with an expression that had grief in it and something else underneath it that was harder to name. Are you injured? She said. No, Harry said. His scar had stopped burning. His magic was steady in his chest, still warm, slightly spent the way you're slightly spent after doing something physical, the pleasant tiredness of use rather than the draining tiredness of constraint. Voldemort, she said. He was actually here. He's been here since September, Harry said. Using Quirrell. He met her eyes. He's dispersed now. Not destroyed. He'll find somewhere else to go, eventually. Which is why, the fragment, she said. Tonight, he said. I need to do it tonight. She looked at him for a moment. She looked at Fawkes, who had appeared at some point in the last few minutes on the windowsill at the corridor's end, present as a witness or a comfort or both. I'll be there, she said. It wasn't a question or an offer. It was a statement of fact in the manner of someone who's decided that the era of appropriate distance is over. Good, Harry said. They walked back through the castle in the afternoon light, Harry and Hermione and Neville and the twins and McGonagall behind them, and Snape further behind still, and Fawkes somewhere above, a warm light moving through the upper corridors, and the stones of Hogwarts absorbed the day the way old stones absorb everything, without judgment, without opinion, just holding it all in the permanent memory of something that will still be standing when everyone who walked these halls has been gone. For centuries. Harry felt the fragment in his scar, cold and quiet now, settled back into its dormancy the way water settles after a disturbance. He felt the shape of it clearly, more clearly than he'd ever been allowed to feel anything about himself. A cold specific thing, not his, never his, existing in him like a splinter in a healed-over wound. Present. Removable. Tonight, he thought. Tonight, finally. The great hall served dinner at 6 and the school sat in its houses and the noise was the enormous comfortable noise of 100 conversations, and at the Gryffindor table Harry ate something, he wasn't sure what, he was not particularly present for the eating, and felt the hours between now and midnight the way you feel the hours before something that can't be rushed. Hermione ate efficiently and didn't talk, which for Hermione was the equivalent of sitting completely still. The twins ate with the appetite of people who'd burned considerable energy and were replacing it without self-consciousness. Neville ate slowly and glanced at Harry 3 times and didn't say anything, and on the third glance Harry said, "It's going to be fine." "I know," Neville said. He looked at his plate. "Thank you. For earlier. For coming." "You'd have come for me," Harry said. Neville looked up. Something in his expression changed, not surprised exactly, but the particular reaction of someone who has been told something true about themselves that they haven't quite believed yet. "Yes," he said. "I would have." "I know," Harry said, and meant it. At 11:30, in the room of requirement, which Harry hadn't known existed until Hermione had read about it and the twins had confirmed it was real and could be found on the map, 5 people and a phoenix gathered in a room that had decided to be a circular space with a stone floor and a single column of clean white light at the center, which none of them had asked for and which the room had apparently determined was appropriate. McGonagall. Hermione. The twins. Snape, who had arrived last and said nothing about being invited and nothing about not being. Harry stood at the center in the column of white light, and Fawkes flew from the doorway and landed on his shoulder, and they stood together the way they'd stood on the windowsill at 4 in the morning 4 days ago, comfortable, familiar, something already established between them that didn't need ceremony. "Are you ready?" Hermione said, from the edge of the circle. Harry felt the fragment in his scar. Cold. Specific. Not his. "Yes," he said. Fawkes opened his wings. And the room of requirement filled with light. Chapter 6, What we build from here. The light was the color of something that had never been dark. Not white, not gold, both, simultaneously, the way a flame is both the thing burning and the thing illuminating, and you can't separate them because they're the same event. It came off Fawkes in waves that weren't heat and weren't sound but that Harry felt in every part of himself the way you feel the first real breath after being underwater, total, immediate, involving every cell. The fragment fought. He'd expected it to, in the abstract way you expect things you haven't experienced. He hadn't expected the specific quality of its resistance, which was not pain exactly but was the feeling of something that had occupied a space so long it had made the space its own, and which was now being told, firmly, warmly, irrevocably, that it was a tenant and the lease was up. The cold in his scar flared white-hot for 3 seconds that lasted a great deal longer than 3 seconds in experiential terms, and Harry stood in the column of light and let it flare and didn't move and didn't close against it because closing against it was the old habit, the decade-long habit of making himself small to survive, and he was done with that particular shape. He opened instead. Fawkes pressed closer, chest to chest again the way he'd done in the Great Hall, and sang the note that was too high for human hearing and kept going, and the light reached into Harry's scar and found the cold thing and, it didn't burn it. It dissolved it. The distinction mattered. Burning would have been violent, would have required force meeting force. This was different. The light found the edges of the fragment the way water finds the edges of a sealed space, found every seam, every boundary where the cold thing ended and Harry began, and it made those boundaries so clear and so bright that the fragment simply lost its grip. Lost the ambiguity it had lived in for 10 years, the blurred edge between itself and its host, and in losing that ambiguity it lost the only purchase it had. The cold left. Not suddenly. It went the way the last of winter goes, not a moment of departure but a gradual realization of absence. 1 second Harry was aware of it and aware of it and aware of it and then he was aware that he hadn't been aware of it for several seconds and that the several seconds felt different from all the seconds before them. Clean. His scar felt clean. Like a window that had been filmed over for so long you'd forgotten glass was supposed to be transparent, and then someone wiped it, and the light came through the way light was always supposed to come through. Fawkes folded his wings. The room's column of light settled back into ambient warmth. Harry opened his eyes, which he hadn't realized he'd closed, and looked at the circle of people around him, and what he saw was, not what he might have expected from 5 people who'd just watched something extraordinary. McGonagall had her hand pressed to her mouth and her eyes were bright. The twins were standing shoulder to shoulder with their usual ironic distance entirely gone, just 2 people watching something they didn't have a frame for and weren't pretending otherwise. Hermione had her notebook open in one hand and her quill in the other, and both had been still for the entire duration, which was the longest Hermione had been still since he'd met her. Snape was in the doorway. He'd moved there during the process, not away, not toward, just to the threshold, where he stood with his arms at his sides rather than crossed, which for Snape was the equivalent of standing with his heart on his sleeve. He was looking at Harry with an expression that was the most unguarded Harry had seen from him, and it had several things in it that would have been difficult to name individually but which together amounted to something simple: relief. Genuine, old, complicated relief. The kind that comes when something you've been afraid of for a long time has finally been resolved in the right direction. Harry touched his scar. It was smooth. Slightly warm from the phoenix fire. Nothing behind it. Just skin. "It's gone," he said. "Yes," said Fawkes, without words. "Is he?" McGonagall started, then stopped herself. "Voldemort," Harry said, reading the question she hadn't finished. "The fragments dissolved. What that means for wherever the rest of him is scattered, I don't know. It doesn't destroy him. But it changes the architecture of what he is. One of his anchors is gone." He thought about Dumbledore's research notes, about the list of objects. There are others. The diary, the ring, the locket. "Not tonight," Hermione said, firmly. Harry looked at her. "Not tonight," she said again. "Tonight is this. The rest has time." He considered arguing. Decided she was right. "Okay." Fred let out a long breath. "Can I just," he gestured vaguely at the space Harry was standing in. "That was the most extraordinary thing I've ever seen, including everything from this entire week, which has been the most extraordinary week of my life, and I once set off a dung bomb in the Great Hall during OWLS." "You did what?" McGonagall said. "Different conversation," George said, quickly. Hermione closed her notebook. Her expression had the quality of someone who'd finished processing something and was now on to the next thing, which was simply her natural state. "How do you feel?" she asked Harry. Harry took a full inventory. His magic was warm and present and running clean through him, no cold pockets, no shadows, no sense of something at the back of himself that wasn't himself. He felt like the morning after the feast had felt, but more so, more completely, the way a note sounds different when the thing that was distorting it is removed. "Whole," he said. "I feel whole." Nobody said anything to that, because there wasn't anything to say to it that wouldn't make it smaller. Snape walked back in from the doorway. He looked at Harry for a moment in the warm light and then he said, in his clipped precise way, "You should sleep." "I know," Harry said. "You have approximately 7 hours before the Ministry Aurors arrive and the next phase of this," he made a brief gesture that encompassed the entire week, the inquiry, Quirrell in the hospital wing, Dumbledore's suspension, all of it. "Begins in earnest. Use them." "Are you giving me pastoral advice?" Harry said. Snape's expression moved fractionally. "I'm giving you tactical advice. There is a difference." "Right," Harry said. "Thank you." A pause. Snape looked like he was going to say something else, and then looked like he'd decided against it, and then said it anyway. "Your mother would have," he stopped. "She would have been," another stop. He appeared to be having a genuine argument with himself about the words and losing. "She would have recognized you," he said, finally. "Immediately. As exactly what you are." It was the most personal thing he'd said to Harry, more personal than anything in the Tuesday classroom. He said it looking at the middle distance rather than at Harry, which was the Snape version of honesty, offered sideways, so neither party had to face it directly. Harry received it the same way. "Thank you," he said again, quietly, in a different register than before. Snape nodded once and left. They filed out after him, the twins, Hermione, McGonagall last. She paused in the doorway and looked back at Harry, who was still at the center of the room with Fawkes on his shoulder. "Minerva," Harry said, which was the first time he'd used her name without the professor, and it surprised them both slightly. She didn't correct it. "What happens to Dumbledore?" he said. "After the Wisengamot review. What actually happens to him?" She was quiet for a moment. Outside the room of requirement, Hogwarts breathed and creaked around them, the old sounds of the castle at night, entirely familiar now after only a week, the way a place becomes familiar when it decides it's yours. "He will face a formal tribunal," she said. "The charges are serious. Criminal, under wizarding law, as Miss Granger documented. The binding statute violations alone carry," she stopped. "But you're not asking about the statute." "I'm asking what you think should happen to him," Harry said. She looked at him for a long moment. In the warm ambient light of the room she looked, for the first time this week, not so much like the perfectly composed professional who'd weathered 38 years of Hogwarts, though she was that, but like a person. A person who'd trusted someone for 38 years and was standing in the aftermath of what that trust had actually been built on, and who was still, with extraordinary stubbornness, refusing to let it make her cynical. "I think," she said, carefully, "that he should face full accountability. Without exception, without the protections his reputation has always provided him. I think the people he has wronged, and there are more than you, Harry, there are many more, deserve the accounting clearly and completely. And I think," she paused. "I think, when it's done, he should be allowed to be old. He is very old, and he is genuinely capable of wisdom, which is different from the control he's been practicing. If those two things can be separated, the accountability and the afterward, then perhaps there's something on the other side of it." "You still," Harry started, then stopped. "Love him," she said. "Not defensive. Just honest. He was my teacher. My colleague. Yes. The answer is yes. That doesn't change what he did." She met Harry's eyes. "Both things are true. I'm old enough to have learned that both things can be true." Harry nodded. "I'm learning that." "You've learned a great deal this week," she said. "Rather faster than anyone had a right to ask of you." "Nobody asked," Harry said. "Which is maybe why I could." She looked at him for a moment with that expression she'd had on Thursday at the inquiry, the one that had grief in it and something underneath. He understood what the underneath was now. It was the same thing Snape's relief had been the same thing as. The recognition of something having been preserved that shouldn't have been in danger of not being preserved in the first place. A child, being a child, against the odds. Intact. "Good night, Mr. Potter," she said. "Good night, Professor," he said. She left. Harry stood alone in the room of requirement for another few minutes. Fawkes was still on his shoulder, warm and quiet. The room had changed while he wasn't looking, the column of light was gone, the stone floor had given way to something warmer, and there was a window that hadn't been there before showing the Hogwarts grounds in the moonlight, the Black Lake silver black, the Forbidden Forest a dark line at the edge of the world. He looked at it for a while. He thought about the week. 7 days. The length of a week was the same as it had always been, 168 hours, ordinary time, and yet the distance between the person who'd walked into the Great Hall on Tuesday and the person standing here was not a week's worth of distance. It was the distance between a before and an after. Between blocked and unblocked. Between what someone else had decided he was and what he actually turned out to be. He felt no particular more actions Claude Sonnet for.